All video content on the Cultivation Audiobooks channel is summarized in the description. Please read carefully to choose a novel that suits you. Don't forget to like, follow, and share the channel. Thank you. 2203 Side Story. Fantasy Journey 44. Barry deliberately moved slowly as he poured tea and set out the snacks for Luke. That was what Luke and Barry had agreed on in the car. He wasn't deliberately messing around with Barry, this was to highlight Bale's money-making abilities. Don't think that they didn't have to play it cool just because the prison guards were police officers. Putting wages aside, whether or not the prison guards worked in a good environment depended on what profits they could make. So, Luke had Barry act as an attendant. The guard captain didn't even dare fart. He quietly took a few steps back. There was no hatred or jealousy in his eyes at all, only admiration. This was the true definition of the elite rich. The tea set was pure white with gold embellishments, and looked extraordinary. After the orange tea was poured out, the rich tea fragrance made the captain feel that he too had become more elegant, and he subconsciously took a deep breath. He subconsciously looked at the Italian coffee machine against the wall on the other side, and felt that the coffee no longer smelled good. Also, the snacks on the three-tiered tea stand hadn't crumbled at all. They were as exquisite and beautiful as ever. Based on this attitude, Mr. Bale probably had some British aristocratic blood in him, right? It was just that the attendant was a little shabby. Putting aside the tuxedo and white gloves, he wasn't even wearing a suit, he was just wearing a clean and tidy uniform. Still, the captain loved the rich, but he didn't hate the poor. After all, it was just that Barry's clothes weren't classy enough, they still couldn't be bought off a rack, and were still a little more upscale than what the captain usually wore. But that was just a small shortcoming. The real point was still Luke. In the captain's eyes, Luke was no different from what Master Wayne had looked like in Barry's eyes earlier. It was the same bright golden light and the ding-ding sound of money. Luke unhurriedly stirred the black tea, took a sip, and ate a pastry. He ate like a gentleman. 5 minutes later, he finished his pastry unhurriedly and crooked a finger. The guard captain, who had almost retreated to a corner, heaved a sigh of relief and stepped forward carefully. "Mr. Bale, how can I help you?" Luke nodded. "This reception room is pretty good. You pass." The captain was immediately relieved again. Thank God, he had finally taken care of this rich man. The prison hadn't spent a single cent on this so-called private reception room. It was all thanks to Luke's donation that this sudden refurbishment could be carried out. But Luke had also said that depending on how well the prison fulfilled its duty, he would donate up to $2 million to improve the prison guards' living quarters. Luke had deliberately mentioned this in front of the ordinary prison guards. If anyone tried to sabotage this good thing which could impact the quality of everyone's daily life, it would be bad luck for the guard captain. After all, this wasn't targeting a single person, but harming the interests of all the prison guards. Of course, that wasn't Luke's only request. During the refurbishment of the room, he had tested the prison guards' obedience. He had gotten the interior design team to deliberately pick a fight, and the prison guards had resolved the matter tactfully and peacefully. However, the prison guards were still worried that this rich man would be unhappy and withdraw his investment. Refurbishing this reception room alone had cost more than $200,000. How much better could a pledge of $2 million do? No matter what, it would be better than their old pigpen-like digs. The warden should be the one to receive such a huge benefit, but Luke didn't want to waste time with someone who had to maintain some dignity as a higher-up, so he had chosen an experienced guard captain as the mouthpiece. Before both sides met, there was room for negotiation, and Luke didn't have to waste his breath. Ignoring the captain's expression, Luke finally got down to business. "How has Mr. Henry Allen been in the last few days?" The captain had a reassuring look on his face. "After your last inspection, we immediately processed the upgrade for Mr. Allen and found a psychiatrist to calm him down. He's currently in a stable mood," Luke said, "then invite him over." The guard captain immediately walked out of the reception room and had his men carry out the order. A few minutes later, Henry Allen entered the reception room. The captain wasn't going to follow him in, but Luke waved at him. "Come in, we should still follow the rules." Even if he and the guard captain were different, it wouldn't be good if the father and son misunderstood this as a power transaction. Since the big patron had spoken, the captain didn't hesitate. As soon as he entered, he automatically retreated to a corner and pretended to be invisible. On the other side, Barry's meeting with his father didn't devolve into tears. Henry didn't seem too concerned about his own future, but he was very excited about Barry's contract as an external consultant. Is this real? Barry nodded vigorously. Henry said, "This is a proper job, right, Barry? I guarantee it's above board." A relieved smile appeared on Henry's face. He slowly sank into a chair and murmured, "That's good. That's great. You can finally live a normal life." The invisible guard captain didn't react to this scene. Why would someone with too many emotions be a prison guard? Luke, on the other hand, was a little touched. It wasn't just because of the father and son's interactions, but also because Henry was a neutral yellow in the system panel. Clearly, Henry hadn't killed Barry's mother, whether it was by his or someone else's hand. Even then, Henry hadn't turned into a bad person after being imprisoned for more than 10 years. Instead, he was afraid of holding his son back. Barry had always wanted to clear his father's name. Luke was touched by this family bond. However, he quickly calmed down. Since he had personally confirmed that Henry wasn't a bad person, he had to rescue him above board. He didn't disturb the father and son. Staying on the other side of the reception room, Luke took out his phone to look up information on Henry's wife's murder. An hour later, after Henry personally thanked Luke, he was politely escorted back to the prison's first-class cell. Both Barry and his father didn't have any misgivings about this. That was how it worked. As long as you had money, you could be upgraded to a separate room or even a suite. Some private prisons even provided services at the level of a rated hotel, and it was completely legal to charge a fee according to the level. As long as you had enough money, your days in prison wouldn't be as painful as you might have imagined. You suffered only because you didn't have money, or not enough of it. The captain followed them out of the prison. Different from before, his attitude toward Barry was clearly friendlier, and he was even more respectful toward Luke. 2204 Side Story, Fantasy Journey 45. It couldn't be helped. A magnate who was willing to spend so much money on one subordinate was much more likable than capitalists who calculated how to cut their subordinates' pay as much as possible. This way, as long as Barry's father's remaining stay was comfortable in prison, the $2 million was in the bag. Rich people who were willing to spend money naturally had to be revered. After they left the prison, Barry was about to say something like thanks, when Luke waved his hand and interrupted him. It's always easier to do good without any worries. Just consider this a team-building event. Barry, I've never heard of this sort of team building. He didn't say anything, but he was even more grateful. Of course, Master Wayne and Luke received the same amount of gratitude. Master Wayne had solved the main problem, and Luke had taken care of the details, but that didn't mean that Luke had done less. Instead, it showed how meticulous he was. Of course, Luke had done this on purpose. He didn't expect Barry to listen to him, but at the very least, he couldn't blindly follow Master Wayne. Master Wayne could take the lead in the team, but Luke had to have a certain power of veto. He wouldn't back down on this point. Returning to the base with Barry, they went straight to Victor. Luke asked, "Is the case simulation done?" Victor waved away the virtual screen in front of him and opened another one. "After you and Bruce talked for 2 days, I did my best to recreate it as closely as possible. You can fill in the details. I'll leave overturning the conviction to you. I'm not a professional, after all." Next, Luke, Barry and Victor adjusted the 3D simulation and added various notes. After a busy afternoon, Luke finally said, "Okay, Victor, sort out the relevant data. I'll have someone send it to the cold case division. Barry, go to CSI in the next few days and make sure that they verify the data. Your father will be cleared of suspicion." Barry had no doubts. During the entire process of adjusting and analyzing the virtual scene, he had been full of regret. Why hadn't he thought of starting with these questions? But Luke seemed to know what Barry was thinking. He simply smiled. "You don't know how the police work or think, and you don't have a supercomputer that can compare with Victor's skills. It wouldn't have been that easy to find ironclad evidence." Barry relaxed. Luke used the opportunity to say, "So, this is the strength of a team. By pooling together what everyone is good at, you can solve a lot of problems that you can't solve on your own." This time, both Barry and Victor nodded. Victor alone could have helped Barry with this, but the beginning would definitely be bumpy, and even after that, it would have taken them a long time to investigate. Professionals, on the other hand, were completely focused on finding weak points in the police evidence. The murder of Henry's wife happened over a decade ago, when technology was definitely far inferior. A lot of the police evidence back then could be considered ironclad, but not necessarily now. For example, some of the bloodstains in the house and on Henry had been deemed random and useless back then. For Luke, who had a complete database of bloodstains, these were traces of a third party, and they didn't match the crime that Henry had purportedly committed. Apart from that, a simulation of how Barry's mother was injured suggested that the murderer was at least a good deal taller than Henry. The scattered evidence was enough to prove that Henry had been deliberately set up. Barry would be going to CSI as an external consultant partly because he would be more reassured if he could keep an eye on things personally, and partly to explain to the forensic scientists how to analyze the evidence. Luke's methods involved a lot of new techniques that ordinary forensic scientists might not necessarily understand. Also, Barry and Henry were father and son, so it wasn't appropriate for Barry's name to appear on evidence for overturning the conviction, so he could only be a consultant. It would be CSI who would officially provide the evidence, it would have nothing to do with Barry. To put it simply, he was external personnel who was volunteering for now. After this case, however, the CSI would be very clear on his level of analytical skills and methods. There would be a lot of opportunities for Barry to be sought out for external help in the future. A senior forensic scientist might not be rich, but it wasn't hard for them to live a comfortable middle-class life. Although Barry didn't have these skills yet, Luke had a lot of information and technology on cracking cases in his database. Barry could learn one or several areas on his own, and the rest could be analyzed using the database. The effect wouldn't be any worse than what a top forensic expert could do. The GCPD would only benefit from it. Barry would also have a respectable profession on the surface, and could still uphold justice. Moreover, who would say anything about a forensic scientist who had a slightly strange character? Luke's cheap uncle Old Grayson had a quirky personality, and other people had to work around that. Barry got busy with work with great relish. Nothing would go wrong, but it would still take 3 to 5 months. Without money, it wouldn't be strange if it took a few years. Now that test subject 1 wasn't around, Luke naturally turned to test subject 2. He talked to Victor for an afternoon, and the two of them reached an agreement. Victor had a strong body, but it was too rudimentary. Luke planned to help make him 2 sets of armor, a simulation suit and a battle protection suit. All Victor needed to do was process data for the Justice League, for example, look up the origins of unfavorable opinions about the League online, and take appropriate countermeasures. With Barry as an example, plus Luke's team-building theory, Victor accepted this arrangement despite feeling a little embarrassed. Luke hadn't charged Barry for his help, right? Luke wouldn't charge him either, right? As a team, they needed to help and work with each other to increase mutual trust. Anyone who was brought in temporarily could only be described as a mercenary. Victor's brain was more convenient than a computer, and he could store data at will. Thus, when he was making the armor, he talked to Luke about data processing. You told me to get an ID and mix in with the anti-Superman and anti-Batman groups. I get it. Victor's eye glowed red, but why do you want me to act like I'm the biggest protester? Luke took a sip of his coffee. Individuals are smart on their own, but a collective just goes with the flow. You know that, right? Victor nodded. With a simple scan, he could stuff a lot of academic knowledge into his head. Of course, remembering, understanding, applying was a process. It wasn't enough to just memorize things. The number of people who could analyze certain phenomena in real life and even make money from it was dropping drastically. Victor just memorized things. He would make some inferences at most, but he wouldn't dig deeper. In this regard, he wasn't much better than an ordinary person. 2205 Side Story, Fantasy Journey 46. Luke spread his hands. Since a collective is mindless, why let other people lead them to deal with us? Victor was lost for words. A moment later, he asked, how do I do that? His mind raced, but he couldn't immediately come up with a plan. Luke chuckled. It's very simple. You have to be the most outspoken and influential one, or at least, one of them. Victor's face twitched. Wouldn't that be cursing himself? Luke ignored his hesitation. Also, you can keep it up until a more obvious wave rises up, Victor couldn't help but add, and fire back. Luke chuckled. No, go a little more crazy. Victor. What? Luke said, use a clearer, simpler, and more provocative slogan, the collective will subconsciously follow it. At that time, whatever slightly more outrageous standpoint you take, those people will follow. Of course, Victor got this, in theory. He had never tried it in practice. Victor, you're asking me to lead these people into a trap. It was a very simple idea. Even though many people were aware of it, it was always effective. The main point was that a person had to be capable enough to obtain the right to speak in a group. This wasn't hard for Victor, who could stay tuned into the internet countless times more than gold nugget. He didn't question the ethics of this behavior. He wasn't as tolerant as Superman, who wouldn't curse back. He just considered the possibility of implementing this strategy. What about the people? At a certain point in time, I'll definitely have to appear in person, and this plan requires me to have multiple ids. Luke said, I'll give you a list. These people are PR professionals who work for me. Use their identities. They'll show up later. Victor was hugely relieved. Getting things done online was just a matter of taking the time to do it. He didn't have the professional ability to interact with people in real life, and he was a bad actor. Just like that, Luke and Victor worked together to perfect this, Project Shadow. Victor was the one who came up with the name. He said it was cooler. Luke went along with it. In any case, any name he came up with wouldn't be nice. A week later, Master Wayne called them out of the lab. Barry wasn't at work for once. He followed Luke in his car to a desolate area on the outskirts of Gotham. The car stopped in front of an abandoned manor. Barry got out with a few cupcakes in hand, and asked Luke, "Where are we?" Luke pointed at Victor with a smile. The youngsters should get along more. Victor was a super database and just needed to have a look in his head. Decades ago, this place belonged to the Wayne family. Barry exclaimed, seriously, he threw away such a big house just like that. He was right. Unlike the manor that Luke had bought, which was basically intact, this was a pile of ruins. Everything was in shambles. There was no maintenance at all. It was even possible that people might have had a rummage around for junk to sell off. Apart from trash or things that were hard to move, there was basically nothing inside. It was just an empty shelf, and perfect for a horror movie just as it was. After a brief hesitation, Victor said in a low voice, after Bruce's parents were killed, this place was abandoned. Barry spat out a lot of cake icing. Then, he said awkwardly, "Fine, let's not talk about that." Two cars arrived while they were talking and stopped behind Luke's car. Master Wayne got out of the Lamborghini. "You're here, what are you talking about?" Barry subconsciously replied, nothing." There was suspicion in Master Wayne's eyes, but he didn't pursue the matter. Barry was a good kid and didn't have any bad intentions. He didn't need to act as high and mighty as Luke. Diana got out of her car as well. Everybody exchanged greetings before they followed Master Wayne into the manor. After entering the main building and passing through a living room that was more than 10 meters long, Master Wayne pushed open two dusty doors. A hall covered in dust and spiderwebs appeared in front of him. However, the hall was 10 meters high and 40 meters long. The white Roman pillars on both sides and the huge broken chandelier that had fallen at an angle was enough to give everyone an idea of how magnificent this place had once been. Anticipation appeared on Master Wayne's face as he gestured. "Put a round table and 7 chairs here in the future," Diana interrupted him politely. "We can add more seats." Master Wayne turned around and looked at her and the others. He nodded. "Yes, there has to be more." The others more or less understood what they were saying. They weren't unfamiliar with the Knights of the Round Table. Round tables meant equality. Master Wayne was paranoid and wanted to control things, but he definitely wouldn't act like everyone had to listen to him. At most, he would just carry out more of the plan behind the scenes. Diana, on the other hand, made it clear that this wasn't an insular circle, and that they had to recruit other like-minded superheroes. Compared with the verbal agreement they had come to do during the incident with Steppenwolf, the round table and chairs here were an official contract. This was also because nobody had chickened out during the battle with Steppenwolf, so everyone had acknowledged each other. By doing this, Master Wayne was formalizing the Justice League. Luke was in favor, and Diana had no objections. That was 3 votes from the oldies. Superman wouldn't have any objections. Among the newbies, Arthur wasn't around, but Barry and Victor didn't object. That was basically unanimous approval. For a moment, Master Wayne was full of ambition. Having teammates was really different from fighting alone. Although he would still be highly vigilant against them, that was his nature. Compared with the people the CEO of Wayne Industries had interacted with, the people from the Justice League were trustworthy enough. They didn't tarry in this rundown manner for long. After taking a look at the future conference hall, For 10 minutes, they retreated. But before they left, Luke approached Diana with a smile. "What you're wearing today is beautiful." Diana looked at her dark red dress and the plunging neckline with a smile. "Thank you," Luke asked. "So, will you do me the honor of having lunch with me?" Diana's eyes flickered. "You're really good with your words," Luke said. "Bruce used them before. I learned from him." Walking not far away, Master Wayne suddenly felt his ears itch, as if a pesky mosquito was buzzing around him. 2206 Side Story, Fantasy Journey 47. In the end, Luke successfully invited Diana out for lunch. He even got into her Lamborghini, and they drove off. Behind them, Master Wayne's eyes flickered, while Barry and Victor were dumbfounded. Stumped for a moment, Barry turned around and looked at Victor. "You drive," Victor said helplessly. "I don't have that much control over this body. If I'm not careful, I might crush the gas pedal." "You drive. I don't want to have to fix the car," Barry said gloomily. "I usually run. It's faster and more convenient than taking a car." Victor didn't care. Pulling him to the car which Luke had left behind, he glanced at it. "It's an auto stick. It's very simple." Barry suddenly slapped its forehead. "Wait, you confused me. Bale's SUV is a smart car. I don't need to drive it," Victor said. "Why didn't you say so earlier?" He then pulled on the door, but it didn't open. Barry coughed and said, "Open sesame." There was a light click, and the passenger door opened. Victor glared at Barry. "You did that on purpose." Barry trembled. "You were too fast," Victor said. "So you're not the fastest one among us," Barry said. "Bale said that we should do our best to have fun in life. There's no meaning in moving quickly all the time." Victor. "Fine, you operate it. I don't care." They bickered as they left. Master Wayne got into his car, but didn't start it immediately. Instead, he tapped the wheel thoughtfully. "Bale, hey." Eating with the battle goddess was something they had arranged beforehand. Luke casually asked about her family and then made a request to visit Paradise Island later. Diana didn't refuse, but she was a little curious. "Why?" Luke shrugged. "It's for the team. I helped take care of Barry and Victor's family issues. If Arthur doesn't object, I want to take a look at Atlantis." Diana swirled the wine in her glass. "I don't think there's any trouble at home," Luke said. "Maybe I need some help too." Diana was intrigued. "What kind of help?" Luke asked. "Like an indestructible sword or an indestructible shield?" Diana got it, but shook her head regretfully. "We don't have the technology to make these things." Luke waved his hand indifferently. "That's just an example. You may have become used to some things, but Bruce and I might be able to do something new with them. That's how scientists think." Pondering for a moment, Diana didn't refuse. "I'll ask. It might not work." Luke smiled. "Putting everything else aside, if someone like Steppenwolf shows up again, are you sure Paradise Island doesn't need an emergency defense weapon?" Diana's eyes flickered. "Like your floating cannons," Luke said indifferently. "That was just for Bruce's benefit. Actually, my fighter plane already has the ability to fly short distances into outer space." Diana. "Say that in front of Bruce if you dare." In the end, Diana didn't make the decision on the spot, but Luke felt that she was definitely tempted. She had lived in England for a long time and roamed other European countries, but there had been a lot of casualties on Paradise Island. If Paradise Island had a spaceship or whatever that Luke was talking about, there would be a lot more room to maneuver in a crisis. Warriors could die on the battlefield, but that didn't mean that reducing casualties wasn't important. Of course, there were a lot of problems. First of all, some consideration had to go into letting an outsider go to Paradise Island, and someone as extremely strong as the Dark Knight at that. Secondly, the Dark Knight was a man, and a handsome and powerful one at that. It had to be pointed out that the Amazon warriors on Paradise Island were all women. If they ran into a man like him, a few of them might want to test him out. Diana was very confident on this point. After all, that was how she had behaved after leaving Paradise Island to interact with the outside world. A month later, Superman returned to Earth. He was a little surprised and embarrassed when he heard about the attack by Steppenwolf. Luke didn't ask what he had obtained from his return to Krypton, but Master Wayne had calmly probed him several times. Unfortunately, Superman didn't reveal anything. Looking at his expression and movements, it didn't look like he had found a treasure this time, but the experience had left him with complicated feelings. Luke wasn't as hasty as Master Wayne. He still had hundreds of years to live. He was much calmer than someone who had already lived half his life and was about to pass his prime. Superman himself was a huge treasure. He had already hidden away the Kryptonian spaceship that had sent him to Earth as a baby. After gathering intelligence from multiple sources, Superman also had a high-level Kryptonian database. Luke didn't know exactly what this database was about or what it was for. But just by looking at the remains of the spaceship left behind by General Zod, one could tell how powerful Kryptonian technology was. So, Luke simply quietly solidified his power network and took the opportunity to replace some specialists researching General Zod's spaceship with his own people. That would be enough for him to play with for 8 to 10 years. Master Wayne was gradually perfecting all aspects of the Justice League, and Luke was helping him. The members had to be aware that while Master Wayne was responsible for setting up the bulk of things, Knight had also contributed a small portion. This thing was essentially similar to a company. Whoever invested more had more say. Anyone who didn't invest had very little say. Master Wayne was a little uncomfortable with Luke's investment, but he had no choice but to accept it. He couldn't publicly say that other capable members weren't allowed to participate in building this team, right? Nobody was an idiot. In particular, when Luke was discussing crowd psychology with Victor, Barry seemed to get something out of it from where he listened in on the side. Superman wasn't present. That didn't matter at all. In any case, this sort of team building happened for an hour every Saturday afternoon, and reporter Clark from Metropolis could listen in remotely just by twitching his ears. Putting deep content aside, the basic principle was to think independently and refuse to blindly follow orders. During the lessons, Luke was very acidic when he mocked the brainless. However saintly Superman was, he didn't want to be lumped in with that crowd at night. Luke would put on his suit and randomly pick lucky audience members to clean up in major cities on the East Coast. Actually, these lucky audience members were targets he had already earmarked earlier on. The random pick was actually in terms of priority, it was only a matter of time before they ran out of luck. This way, Dark Knight stood out for a period of time among the members of the Justice League. Compared with Batman, who basically only appeared in Gotham, the Dark Knight's sweep through 1/3 of America was too high profile. 2207 side story, Fantasy Journey 48 Superman was also very high profile. He easily held up cars, planes, rockets and buildings, but that was mainly to save people. The Dark Knight, however, was a little different. He appeared at violent crime scenes every time, but not as a CSI member. Regardless of whether the offenders were about to commit a crime, or were in the middle of carrying it out, or it was after the fact, the moment they showed themselves, Knight would beat them up, rescue and treat the victims, and call the police. He didn't leave until the police arrived. Every time, the police officers would see his fluttering cape gradually change color before he disappeared into the night. Superman liked saving civilians more than fighting crime. The way Knight appeared and crippled criminals was undoubtedly very ruthless. But compared with Batman, who didn't get close to ordinary people and only liked to have a chat with the criminals, Knight's actions focused more on saving people. Compared with the crippled criminals, the victims who were injured or whose lives had been in danger were the ones who deserved sympathy. Here, where crime rates were far higher than back home, ordinary people didn't dislike this sort of vigilante at all. Growing up here, everyone had been robbed and beaten up at least 3 to 5 times in their lives. Master Wayne was notorious in Gotham, but the GCPD police were still happy to clean up his messes for him. This was also a form of self-protection. Who knew? They might be the ones who needed rescuing one day. Even police officers on the front line thought the same. Thus, Victor, who had infiltrated the enemy's ranks, realized that no matter how much he shouted, public opinion was always lukewarm, rendering the second half of Project Shadow useless. Luke found it strange. Why the second half? The second half of the plan is the last resort when things get serious. It's best if it doesn't happen in this lifetime. This saves time. After thinking for a moment, Victor had to admit that he really wanted to show off. After conning Victor, Luke mumbled to himself, if I could rouse local opposition just by harvesting points, would I need to carry out such a long-term investigation? There was no strong public opinion at the bottom, mostly because the guys who did bad things could be considered the boogeymen who could be used to stop children crying at night. Unless a TV station hired professional actors or had the locals lie through their teeth, it was impossible to wash away these people's evil deeds. Of course, there was one TV station that tried this. Then, that was it for the station. Online chat records were leaked which showed that the TV station staff had been hiring actors and fabricating fake news for years. Slandering Knight was just one of their businesses. Even more seriously, there was proof they had fabricated evidence of the previous American president taking bribes, which caused a stir among the masses. This instant slap in the face dealt a huge blow to the major TV station's reputation. More importantly, that fallen president's rival wasn't doing well right now. The ex-president couldn't wait to grab attention and turn things around. That was right, politicians were very familiar with this sort of thing. This person immediately jumped out and announced that he would participate in the next election, and wouldn't let those despicable people continue serving. This person had already lost 3 times, if he didn't seize the opportunity to counterattack, he would be unworthy of this tenacity. For a moment, the Dark Knight wasn't in the limelight anymore. All sorts of dirt flew over the internet. Although it didn't involve a lot of people, there was a lot of it. Of course, this was because Luke had fanned the flames and helped throw out some especially shocking news. Was it news that American politicians operated behind the scenes and traded power and money? It barely counted, and it definitely wasn't a surprise to ordinary people. What politician would have the cheek to say that they didn't do these things? So, Luke deliberately released explosive scandals, such as XX chatting up his sister-in-law or daughter-in-law. Strictly speaking, these actions were moral issues at most, and weren't against the law. But their reputations would be tarnished, and these scandals would be brought up again and again. Luke had no qualms about doing this. The government here really held too little control. The economy was in poor shape, and the people at the bottom here generally lived poorer lives than those back home. They were very resentful of the government, and could easily stir up trouble. So what if Batman broke the law? So what if the Dark Knight broke the law? At the very least, these two dealt with criminals and bad guys. Those government people broke the law by making money illegally. If they opposed these vigilantes, they would be the first ones in the line of fire. Master Wayne couldn't sit still anymore. It wasn't that he was jealous, he just felt uneasy when he realized that Luke was too proficient at this. Master Wayne was good at playing with all levels of society in the palm of his hand as he did his own righteous thing. It was just that he might be very successful in Gotham, but his efforts in the rest of America just barely passed muster. After all, he was only human, and was almost 40 years old. How could he compare with someone who didn't need to sleep, but forced himself to do so for 2 hours every day? So, when Master Wayne had a chat with Luke at the base, he had mixed feelings when he looked at Luke, who was still young and handsome and as fair as a pretty boy. However, their conversation was quite amicable. As a big capitalist, Master Wayne had been in the business world for many years. He looked calm on the surface, and just tried to sound Luke out, hoping that he wouldn't cause too big a stir. Luke didn't agree right away. Instead, he presented the facts and explained the situation, and made it clear that he wasn't planning to create a commotion in Gotham and Metropolis. Master Wayne felt a little suffocated. The truth was that the economy was in bad shape. While the financial sector flourished, manufacturing had stagnated, and there were few jobs to go around. Without jobs, or given how hard it was to find stable and suitable employment, a lot of people at the bottom would naturally rely on illegal means to survive. If all the gang bigshots in Gotham City were wiped out in one night, there would be other groups fighting for money and power the next day, and everything would go back to what it was like before. If something this big did break out, many people would definitely blame it on Knight. Thinking of it this way, Luke said that indeed, the only feasible plan was to distribute his efforts evenly across all the major cities in America. It wasn't like Luke couldn't do what Master Wayne had done in Gotham, right? After going back and forth for a while, they finally reached a compromise. At that moment, Barry, who had returned earlier on, was already a little sleepy. He could only stuff snacks into his mouth to stop himself from dozing off. After listening for a few minutes, Victor decisively left. He wasn't interested in politics at all, much less in this squabble between two rich bigshots. As he was pouring tea for Master Wayne to moisten his dry throat, Luke's phone pinged. His expression changed. He picked it up and gave a light exclamation of surprise. No wonder Arthur hasn't contacted us recently. 2208 side story. Fantasy Journey 49. Even Victor, who had hunkered down not far away to analyze data, turned around at Luke's words. What did he do? Luke coughed and said, for the record, I'm not spying on him. It's just that he stands out in a public place. It can't be considered an invasion of privacy, all right. Everybody was lost for words. After thinking for a moment, however, they nodded in agreement. It was like walking into the line of sight of a street camera, which indeed couldn't be considered taking a covert shot. Luke finally sent out the surveillance photo he had just received on his phone. Barry's mouth dropped open, and he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. In the photo, Arthur was boarding a cargo plane at the airport with a beautiful woman. Arthur still looked like an idiot, but the woman was as beautiful as a painting. She had snow-white skin and fiery red hair. Coupled with the loose white robe she was wearing, she was quite stunning. Even as a robot, Victor wanted to whistle. Master Wayne, however, studied the surveillance photo seriously. Who is this woman? Someone who got close to the Justice League, especially a beautiful woman who got close to their male members, definitely needed to be paid more attention to. Luke shook his head. Who knows? The problem would be if Arthur didn't have a girlfriend. Barry wouldn't be able to sleep well at night. Barry blinked blankly. Huh, Victor chuckled. He had seen a lot of this in college. Master Wayne immediately got it. No matter how experienced he was, he couldn't help but roll his eyes at Luke. He's still a kid. Don't talk about that. As they chatted, Luke took the opportunity to close the photo. If it wasn't for the fact that nothing had happened after Arthur returned, he wouldn't have bothered to mention it in front of everyone. After all, Superman had returned from another planet, but Arthur had only made a call to say that he had dealt with the box in Atlantis and was now goofing off in a seaside town in Maine. For the Justice League, this small interlude was nothing more than gossip. Barry was busy, getting all sorts of evidence for his father's testimony. More importantly, the fact that he could run fast was useless. There was no way that the various government departments would move so quickly. Luke and Master Wayne had no intention of getting involved. There was no need to be too enthusiastic when it came to small matters. That would easily make Barry feel uncomfortable. It was like a friend running to the bathroom door to chat when you were showering. Not only did Victor have to keep an eye on Project Shadow, he also had to work on 2 sets of his own armor with Luke. The high-grade simulation suit would allow him to return to human society like a normal person, and the defensive suit could significantly increase protection for him. He couldn't bear to give either one up, so he could only do his best. Watching how Luke handled the team from the side, Master Wayne had a lot of thoughts, and was already preparing to upgrade his own capability. As for Luke, harvesting points, garnering favorable impressions with his teammates, and being on guard against Master Wayne were all just basic operations. The most difficult thing was getting along with Diana. It wasn't easy to approach the almost perfect battle goddess. Unexpectedly, 2 days later, the surveillance system caught Arthur and the red-haired beauty in a town on Sicily. If it wasn't for the system's yellow-level emergency warning, Luke would have thought that they were jet-setting around the world. When he saw on the surveillance feed that Arthur and his new girlfriend were being pursued by a group of soldiers in strange armor, Luke was a little curious, but not tense. It had to be pointed out that Arthur was a demigod after all. He had thick skin and flesh, and hadn't been seriously injured by Steppenwolf. Sure enough, the town was thrown into chaos by the battle, and bricks flew everywhere. Arthur and his girlfriend wiped out the soldiers before they headed out to sea. Although Arthur seemed to be injured, that was nothing for a demigod. Thinking for a moment, Luke decided to mind his own business. Arthur looked like his brain was full of muscles, but he could still remember how to contact the League. He hadn't said anything. This was clearly a private matter. Maybe he was just picking up a girl. So what if Luke stuck his head out? Was he going to steal Artus's girl away? So, he simply told everyone what had happened, and Master Wayne immediately said that he would get the Foundation to clean up the aftermath. Half of the town had been demolished in a huge battle. The casualties weren't especially serious, but there were still some. If too much of this sort of thing accumulated, it would be hard for them to build a good reputation. While Master Wayne was doing his job, Luke, Victor and Barry watched the video of the battle and clicked their tongues as they discussed Arthur's new girlfriend. Not only could she fight, she and Arthur could still flirt with each other. This dog food made the 2 single dogs feel bittersweet. Unfortunately, Victor's body was more mechanical than not. He no longer had hormones or a working tool, and could only watch. Barry had trouble communicating with ordinary people. The only female superhuman he knew was Diana, and Luke had been much faster than him in that regard. But Luke still patted his shoulder. There's bread and milk, there will also be a girlfriend. With those parting words, he left. Barry blinked and then turned to look at Victor. When did I say I wanted a girlfriend? Also, what does a girlfriend have to do with bread and milk? Victor, who had been a football player in college, smiled mysteriously. When you get a girlfriend, you'll understand. Good luck. He then went back to work. In fact, what happened with Arthur was just the beginning. A few days later, the reconnaissance spaceship's surveillance network detected major activity in the North Atlantic. However, it was a stormy night, and Earth's satellites couldn't pick out anything. The spaceship had also detected some energy anomalies, which was why it had sent a reconnaissance plane down to watch the battle. To put it simply, Arthur beat up his brother, and his mother came out to clean up the mess. Then, Arthur became the king of Atlantis. Luke observed Arthur's new weapon with great interest. The golden trident was smooth and slick, but it was far inferior to the 5-pronged metal trident that Arthur had used before. It was just that the gold color was more eye-catching. In addition, Arthur was wearing a suit of armor that was gold and green, with 2 green gloves. Luke could only say that it was a good thing he didn't have a helmet. However, Arthur didn't send a message for help the entire time. He even made eyes at the red-haired beauty. As a master of psychology, how could Luke not tell that there was something fishy about this couple? Back at the airport, there had still been a sense of distance in their body language and micro-expressions. In the Sicilian seaside town, they had been a little hesitant. After this duel, in the Atlantic, they were clearly on the same page. Clearly, not only had Arthur obtained a trident, armor and the throne, he even had a ready-made queen. To put it nicely, this was a learning experience, but to put it bluntly, it was a family dispute. If it were Luke, he wouldn't want outsiders to interfere. But it shouldn't be a problem for him to check out Arthur's new girlfriend after things were over, right? Pondering for a moment, Luke sent a message to Barry and Victor. A work trip to the Mediterranean for the day. All expenses paid. If you're interested, come find me right away. 2209 side story. Fantasy journey. 50. They soon embarked on the day trip. Even Victor, who was as smart as a machine, joined in on the fun. In his own words, he had been processing data every day recently, and felt that his brain was about to turn into data itself. They were still waiting for news on Barry's father. One day off was fine. After all, this was a team-building operation. Luke had helped Barry, so he could naturally help Arthur. Master Wayne, of course they didn't let him know. Big capitalists with private jets didn't need to take the same plane. If they wanted to go, they would do so themselves. The 3 of them went to Luke's base first and took his exclusive commercial jet. Compared with fighter planes that had the best combat performance, commercial jets had 2 characteristics: they were comfortable and fast. The prerequisite for a comfortable plane was that it had to be big. Otherwise, a person would have to bend slightly when they got up and walked around, and passengers would be shoulder to shoulder. After the plane took off and Luke set a course, Barry and Victor toured the plane, the former exclaiming excitedly and the latter nodding non-stop. Luke sat down on a gray couch. All right, money is just a tool for me. This is just something for Justice League members to hitch a ride on. A regular commercial plane is enough. Both of them were lost for words, but what could they do? Luke was rich. There was no point in feeling like sour grapes when a rich person said something like that. After all, the other party had the ability to buy 2 planes, one to fly, and the other to throw into a hangar to collect dust. After ensuring how comfortable the place was, the 3 of them weren't in a hurry to get to work, and started chatting about what happened recently. Subtle influence was what Luke was best at. Taking advantage of this free time, he told them why Knight's operations had increased recently. These 2 were far more naive than Master Wayne, but they couldn't be fooled. Luke made his objective clear and simple so that they wouldn't misunderstand. Of course, this was the best time to have an impact. He was talking about his own attitude, but if the other party could accept it, they would also be influenced by it. The plane would arrive in Sicily in just 3 hours. Luke felt that this amount of time was just right. After they left the airport, Luke gave Barry the flight suit which the Guardians of the Galaxy used. There's still 100 kilometers to go. You should switch gears. A moment later, Barry was hollering excitedly as the 3 of them flew toward the seaside town. Compared with running on the ground or even over buildings, flying completely free in the air was a brand new thrill which Barry liked very much. Unfortunately, it was too short a journey, and they had only flown a short distance before they arrived. The 3 of them landed outside the town, and Luke took them to sit behind a flower fence of an al fresco cafe. Barry looked uneasy. Why do I feel like everybody's looking at us? Luke crossed his legs. Because we're all men. Barry looked around and saw that there really weren't many men eating together. It was either women or couples. What's so strange about that? Luke smiled but didn't say anything. Victor lowered his head and chuckled. That's because you look like a weak chicken. You're fair and thin, and you look young, Luke murmured to himself. Thankfully, there were 3 of them, and the people around them weren't paying too much attention to them. It was just that Barry was too sensitive. After the food was served, he was no longer in the mood to pay attention. 10 minutes later, Luke said softly, incoming. Everyone's gazes almost instantly zoomed in on a side street not far away. Arthur walked out with the red-haired beauty in his arms. Barry was about to say something, when Luke threw a Sicilian rice ball into his mouth to stop him. Barry and Arthur were familiar with each. If Arthur heard him with his demigod hearing, there wouldn't be a good show to watch. The couple also came to this cafe and sat down 10 meters away from the 3 of them on the other side of the flower fence. Clearly, Luke had specially chosen this position. The flower fence could block their line of sight if they didn't pay attention. As long as they deliberately moved their line of sight, however, they could see the situation on the other side through the gaps in the fence. Even the most innocent of the 3, whose mouth had been stuffed with the rice ball, knew what it meant to be a silent onlooker. He turned his chair and body slightly so that he could see through the fence, and picked up his Sicilian beef roll to eat. It couldn't be helped. The PDA in front of him was too sweet. He had to use tasty food to comfort his young heart. Under the early morning Sicilian sunlight, the red-haired beauty's face was as fair as jade and almost perfect, as if her entire face was glowing. Coupled with her bright red curly hair and loose white robe, Barry felt that only the battle goddess could compare. For example, celebrities might have the looks, but not necessarily the temperament. The beautiful woman leaned against the idiotic Arthur. The 2 of them whispered to and fed each other every now and then with smiles on their faces. The sour smell of love filled the air. Luke only had one comment: Beauty and the Beast. No regular person could ever imagine how someone like Arthur could win at life like this. His father was just a lighthouse guard in Maine. Who the hell knew how he had won the favor of a high-ranking Atlantean woman and given birth to Arthur? It was true that Luke didn't know who that Atlantean woman was, but Arthur had gone back into the ocean and made a big fuss, and had then even hooked up with a woman as beautiful as this. When Arthur returned the box before, it was possible that he had been returning it to this beauty. Atlanteans who could guard the box couldn't be too low in rank. For Arthur to hook this beauty, he had to have some sort of background. The 3 of them watched in secret. It wasn't until Barry had stuffed the beef rolls and rice balls into his stomach that Luke tapped the table and said, "All right, let's go say hi." Barry. Huh. Victor lowered his head and chuckled. It was only when Luke took the lead, and Victor followed him, that Barry got up. Arthur was sweet-talking his new girlfriend, Mara, when someone patted his shoulder. Arthur. This voice. He suddenly turned around. Bale. Victor. Barry. Luke smiled like a gentleman. Surprise. Motherf *CKER. Both Victor and Barry added inwardly. Then, Luke stretched out his hand. I'm Bale, Arthur's friend. Beautiful lady, how should I address you? Seeing that Arthur had no objections, Mara knew that he was telling the truth, and that the 2 of them were even pretty close. So, she stretched out her hand and smiled. Hello, Bale, you can call me Ra. Luke bowed slightly and pretended to kiss her hand. Of course, he didn't really press his mouth to her skin. It was just that Arthur couldn't see it. Arthur was a little unhappy. Hey, when did you become so polite? Luke raised an eyebrow. This is our first meeting. Lady Mara gives me the sense that she's a princess. With a smile in her eyes, Mara watched the 2 of them interact. Arthur subconsciously retorted, nonsense. Why didn't you do that with Diana? Luke was surprised. As you said before, she's very strong. I'm afraid I can't beat her. Arthur. Holy sh*t, how can you be like this? Mara said, I want to hear about this Diana too. Everybody. 2210 side story. Fantasy Journey 51. In the end, Luke and the other 2 naturally didn't stay behind to tell Mara about the other princess. That was something for Arthur to worry about. It had nothing to do with passers-by like them. Besides, it wasn't like Luke was accusing Arthur of lying. Praising a woman for being strong was usually how a man sweet-talked a woman. Mara was just teasing Arthur a little. Luke and the other 2 tactfully left after meeting her. Then, the plane took off for Greece. The three of them went to look at the temples, especially the shrine where the holy fire had burned not long ago. The moment Steppenwolf was killed, the fire beacon here had automatically gone out, but it had still burned for several consecutive days before that. It had been international news that a fire had continued to burn without a fuel source in the shrine. Given its location, many people had guessed part of it was related to the gods. Of course, most people didn't expect it to be a distress signal. A few days after the fire went out, the place was sealed off by the Greek government to be studied. That was all Greece could do. It had been so long since the incident, but the researchers hadn't gained anything. They withdrew one after another, and it was the tourists' turn to revere the miracle. Luke and the other two mixed in with them, and didn't stand out. Victor, who would have been the most eye-catching, was wearing a hoodie, sunglasses, and a trial version of the simulation armor. Nobody paid attention to him. The three of them went around the shrine, and Barry didn't forget to ask Luke to take a few photos of him. This young man had never been anywhere since he was young, let alone overseas. He was very bouncy. At that moment, a voice rang out behind them. "Are you really here on holiday?" Barry, who was looking for the next location to take a photo, turned around and waved with a smile. "Diana." Diana waved gracefully and looked at Luke. "Didn't you say that you would wait for news?" Under the afternoon sun of the Aegean Sea, the battle goddess looked tall and elegant in her beige wool dress. Under her wide-brimmed hat was a noble-looking face, and her red lips were curved up in a charming smile. Luke shrugged. "Actually, we're here to see Arthur's girlfriend." Diana was surprised. "Girlfriend?" Barry and Victor nodded in agreement. Diana turned serious. It seems that I'm the only one who doesn't know. Fill me in." The four of them chatted for the whole afternoon. Then, Victor and Barry took Luke's private jet back to America from the airport in Athens, while the battle goddess had Luke remain behind. The two single dogs could only conclude that Europe wasn't a suitable place for them to stay for the long term. The sour smell of PDA was everywhere. Even the usually valiant battle goddess had taken the initiative to ask a man out now that she was here. Even if the person was the Dark Knight, it was too much. In fact, everything was purely in their heads. Diana had asked Luke to stay behind just to take him to Paradise Island. It wasn't a date at all. Strictly speaking, the person Luke wanted a date with was actually Diana's mother, the true ruler of Paradise Island, Hippolyta. The biggest obstacle if he wanted to take something out of Paradise Island clearly wasn't his old battle comrade, Diana, but the Amazon Queen whom he had no friendship with. Of course, Luke had contributed a lot in the operation to kill Steppenwolf. The other party might extend friendship, but whether or not she was willing to give him practical benefits was another matter. A leader with power often wasn't impulsive, especially when it came to giving out benefits. Under Diana's lead, they flew over the ocean at night, and a boat leisurely set out. After picking them up, the female warrior who had been steering the boat turned around and disappeared into the night again. In just a few minutes, the boat passed through a spatial barrier, and a large island with glowing lights appeared in front of them. Although it was night, it didn't prevent Luke from enjoying the view. There were green trees, flowers, high mountains, grass, and classic white marble buildings. At first glance, it looked like the shrine they had seen in the afternoon. The boat landed on the beach. Diana waved, and Luke jumped onto the beach with her. As they walked slowly side by side, Diana finally told him about the arrangements for this meeting. "Rest well tonight. Someone will take you to see Her Majesty tomorrow morning." Luke hummed in response and looked around the island. After a brief hesitation, Diana warned him in a low voice, "You have to pay attention to your words when you see the Queen tomorrow. She won't understand your sense of humor." Luke nodded with a smile. "Yes, I know. Old people tend to be more set in their ways." Diana realized that she couldn't argue with that. It wasn't like she could say that her mother was a trendsetter who kept up with the times. Depressed, the battle goddess could only bring him to a spacious stone villa. She was about to say goodbye and leave, when he said, "Is there anything to eat?" "I'm hungry." Diana was stumped, and Luke said solemnly, "We were out all of today. We didn't even have a third of our usual portions." Recalling how Luke ate even more than she did, Diana nodded in understanding. "I'll have someone send you some, enough food." Luke, however, walked to the porch of the stone villa and looked around. "It should be fine to set up a barbecue here, right?" Diana. 10 minutes later, Diana sat on the edge of the white marble porch and looked at Luke, who was quickly preparing the ingredients a few meters away. She was a little curious. Is this how you trained your cooking skills? Luke didn't stop. He quickly cut the beef into pieces and replied honestly, no. How could he train himself any quicker than directly learning from ready-made lists of abilities? Most bad guys didn't do anything productive, and less than 1 in a million would be good at cooking. However, Luke had killed a lot of bad guys. Combining the cooking skills of hundreds of first- and third-rate chefs into elementary culinary skills, which had no shortcomings, was just a matter of using credit points. Diana waited for a moment. So, Luke said tactfully, it's a secret. Diana couldn't help but imagine how this guy might have been trapped in some wilderness before, and had been forced to learn to cook himself. Luke didn't want to discuss such a boring topic. He asked casually, what about you? It's been so many years. Why didn't you go to France to learn how to cook? You can't eat delicious food in England, right? Diana couldn't help but laugh. Your English afternoon tea isn't bad. Luke curled his lip. You can't just rely on afternoon tea to survive. There's no harm in trying a little more. Diana's eyes flickered. What are you implying? Luke's hands didn't stop even as he turned his head. I'm not implying anything, it's just that good food is one of the things I like the most. Diana said, even if the negotiation with the Queen doesn't succeed this time. Looking into her eyes, Luke nodded calmly. Some things can't be traded. 2211 Side Story. Fantasy Journey 52. Diana tilted her head and thought for a moment. She nodded silently and looked away. Luke didn't say anything else and turned back to his night barbecue on Paradise Island. Their conversation just now had been a test. Since this was a test, he couldn't push her too hard. Besides, as the saying went, righteousness is achieved when one has no secular desires. He really didn't have any goals for Paradise Island at the moment, especially when it came to forging weapons. Who knew what else he could obtain? If he didn't have high expectations, he naturally had no worries. However, if he as a master psychologist couldn't understand the meaning behind the battle goddess words, it would be a waste. Her heart was still full of uncertainty. This was already much better than the earliest situation. But Luke wasn't here to pick up girls. Still, the battle goddess' conflicted feelings would make life more interesting in the future. That was what life was like. For example, when his physique was buffed up at the very beginning, he had messed around for a while. It was satisfying, but it was essentially no different from when Tony had been a playboy. At most, he had a higher moral bottom line and wouldn't kick someone out naked. Later, his interests basically shifted to grinding points and leveling up as he cultivated his tech abilities. He was no longer interested in pure physical communication. Now, it was very hard for him to become entangled with a top beauty since his interests had expanded to the wider universe. Even as his mind whirled with these random thoughts, his hands didn't stop moving. As his fingers brushed over the meat, the nanomaterial on his fingertips turned into skewers which detached from his armor. Attracted by the strong aroma, Diana looked up and realized how Luke was using the nanomaterial. She couldn't help but complain, your armor has so many functions. Luke chuckled, it's nothing more than a tool, and it's sterilized with plasma so that it's hygienic. Diana, who's talking about hygiene? That being said, when Luke gave her the first batch of skewers, she couldn't help but accept them. Thinking for a moment, she still felt that she should do something. Whether or not he could cook was a matter of talent, but whether or not she could do something was a matter of attitude. So, she walked into the house and then brought out a white marble pitcher with 2 stone bowls. She uncorked the pitcher and filled the 2 bowls with orange-red fruit wine. She pushed a bowl over and raised her own. May everything go smoothly for you. Amused, Luke raised his bowl as well. May your highness prosper in your martial arts. Diana smiled. Don't worry, call me if anything happens. I guarantee we'll win. The 2 wine bowls clinked together lightly, and the wine in the bowl rippled slightly, reflecting the stars in the sky. The next day, his meeting with the Amazon Queen, Hippolyta, wasn't as easygoing as what had happened in his last world. Everything was as serious as a state visit. In fact, Queen Hippolyta treated this like a state visit. The reason why Diana had been able to persuade her to have this meeting was closely related to Steppenwolf's helmet, which Luke had told her to bring back. The strength which Luke had revealed made it clear that he definitely wasn't someone that an intelligent being could casually step on. Furthermore, Luke had Diana pass on the fact that he could sell a short-range spaceship to the Amazons. It wasn't that the Amazons were unfamiliar with this sort of technology or were fearful of the danger it could pose, it was just that they didn't have the ability to fight a space battle. What Luke was saying was that they could use this spaceship to attack or evacuate at any time of their own initiative. Both sides weren't enemies, and people would always respect friends who were strong enough. It was because of these various considerations that Hippolyta had agreed so quickly to Luke's request to meet on the island. But Luke himself didn't know what Paradise Island had that could be useful to him, so naturally, the deal wasn't set in stone. However, the Queen generously gave him a week and opened up common areas of Paradise Island to him. In any case, these areas weren't top secret. Luke thanked the Queen politely for her generosity and left the palace escorted by the guards. After he disappeared from the palace entrance, the Queen turned to look at Diana. "Are you sure he's only in his 30s? Diana, who had been observing the meeting without saying anything, relaxed and sat down on a stone chair. "I'm not sure. I had Bruce, that's Batman, check his background. He told me that it was fake. However, the records are so well done it's hard to determine their validity." The Queen nodded thoughtfully. "From everything he showed today, he's indeed a very experienced person. He's very familiar with handling official meetings like this." Diana tilted her head. "Maybe because he's a tech businessman in the outside world and often negotiates with people." The Queen shook her head. "You don't have much contact with people like that. Generally speaking, they stand at the top and are used to ordering other people around. That's the feeling he gives me, even if he's very polite." "Diana. They, for example," the Queen glanced at her. "Like the rulers of Atlantis. Or your father," she added inwardly. The Amazon Queen wouldn't have brought this up in particular if Luke didn't have this aura. Surprised, Diana thought for a moment, then shook her head. "I really can't tell. In our league, Bale is indeed special, but it's usually Batman who makes the decisions. Bale rarely orders anyone around." The Queen chuckled. "That's because he doesn't need to give orders to make you listen." "Am I right?" Diana thought for a moment, then nodded in agreement. Noticing her expression, the Queen finally said, "If you have different feelings for him, don't be in a hurry to make a decision." Diana was stunned. "Huh." The Queen sighed and stroked her daughter's face. "I know very well what the past 100 years have been like for you. So, don't rush. Let nature take its course." Diana smiled and didn't turn away from her mother's hand. "It's not like I'm a kid experiencing first love. There are many men who pursue me. Don't worry." The Queen didn't believe her. The relationship from 100 years ago had started so quickly partly because Diana had been immature and had experienced love for the first time back then, and she was inherently stubborn and unafraid by nature. The biggest problem was still curiosity and mystery. The man from 100 years ago might not be able to attract Diana as she was now, but the Dark Knight clearly had those qualities. The Queen didn't want Diana to be unknowingly drawn to them. Otherwise, she wouldn't have brought it up at the risk of deepening Diana's impression of him. It seemed that things hadn't reached that stage yet, but it looked like it was heading in that direction. But what could the Queen do? She couldn't threaten the Dark Knight, the person who had personally cut off Steppenwolf's head. 2212 Side Story. Fantasy Journey 53. Back then, Steppenwolf had invaded Paradise Island as if the place was uninhabited, and snatched the mother box. If it wasn't for the fact that he was a coward who had fled as soon as he obtained the mother box, the Queen would have died on the spot. Luke had stomped on an opponent as powerful as that, and had even cut off his head as spoils of war. Although Diana's account also included the other superheroes who had helped out, the Queen could still tell who had contributed the most. It was best to have such a powerful ally. She would be crazy to provoke him. This advice was her last effort. She could only let nature take its course after this. Looking at her daughter, who was looking into the distance, the Queen made this decision. For the next week, Luke had a lot of fun on Paradise Island. Except for the fact that he was watched by a bunch of female warriors during his morning training with Diana every day, everything else was very relaxed. The good thing about that, however, was that nobody else wanted to spar with him anymore. Diana was the strongest of them all. If he could fight with her on even footing, everyone else would be killed instantly. The rest of the time, Diana would show him around their farmlands, pastures, ranches, orchards, vineyards and so on. In the end, there were only two things that caught Luke's eye. The first was wine. There were no men on Paradise Island, which was isolated from the rest of the world. Apart from training, the female warriors all had their own interests. Wine-making was very important, or rather, the most important thing in their daily lives. Fruit wine was very popular. Few of them drank beer, while there was a whole bunch of aged wine stashed in their cellars. In the outside world, wine that was decades old was a super luxury, but Paradise Island had wine-making skills passed down over the years. Some of the wine in the cellars here were over 100 years old. Although Luke didn't know much about red wine, he could still gauge their quality based on the food which he knew they were paired with. There was no need to look for the queen if he wanted to buy wine. With a wave of Diana's hand, Luke could take whatever wine he wanted from any year older than a century ago. In any case, a batch of wine was made every year, and it was fine for the Amazons to skip 1 year. Luke didn't pay special attention to the oldest batch of wine. Instead, after asking the female warrior in charge of the wine-making, he chose a year where the grapes were said to be of better quality. In a good mood, he couldn't help but joke with Diana, "No wonder you don't care about money. A bottle of this wine would cost tens of thousands of dollars, right?" Diana rolled her eyes at him. "Then I might as well go diving for some antiques that are much older and more valuable than this wine." Luke was lost for words. That made sense. This was the Mediterranean. This had been a prosperous trade route in olden times, and there were countless shipwrecks here. Ordinary people couldn't access the shipwrecks, but the battle goddess would have a way. Apart from the wine, Luke's second gain was the Amazons, ancestral, materials and methods for forging weapons. Although they were primitive, Luke felt a trace of a divine power buff. Compared with his telekinesis buff, a buffed physical weapon was more effective for breaking through defenses, and it wouldn't be a one-time thing. He also noticed that the Amazons didn't seem to have much divine power to complete this buff. It was also possible that they didn't know that they were buffing their weapons with divine power, and were just operating according to tradition. Without sufficient divine power, the weapons he forged naturally wouldn't be as godly. But Luke didn't lack divine power, he had the power of faith. It was just that this was still the territory of the Amazons, and he didn't want to build anything right away. It didn't matter if he failed. The chances of him failing to forge divine weapons using the Amazons' methods were basically 100%. Nobody would laugh at him. But if he succeeded, all of Amazon would probably make him stay. Compared with earning points, it was useless. No matter how beautiful and valiant the Amazons were, women weren't as fun as playing with tech. In order to obtain the materials and methods, Luke gave them the technology to make the floating cannon turrets. Both Diana and the Queen liked this sort of equipment with fierce firepower. It didn't need to be used for aerial combat. For just guarding Paradise Island, it was fast enough. Also, full automatic control could be changed to semi-auto mode. An Amazon could sit inside and lock onto a target on the screen. Just like in a shooting game, all they would need to do was press a button to fire. It would take a long time for Paradise Island to build its own turret, but the technology was there. It wasn't hard for Diana to set up a few companies in the outside world and complete the purchase and assembly of parts. The only problem was the power source. Luke also provided a batch of rechargeable energy batteries in exchange for some of the raw materials for Amazon's divine weapons. These batteries could be recharged with many types of energy, including electricity, heat and the high-level energy of the mother box. It was just that the efficiency of each type of energy was different. Given that they had chosen the floating cannon turret, the spaceship clearly didn't meet the Queen's requirements. Amazon still planned to remain on this island. In the end, Luke still gave the Queen and the Princess 2 non-standard spaceships as a gift. The Queen's spaceship looked a little like a sovereign ship. It looked like a cigar with gentle lines and a golden body. Diana's ship, on the other hand, was silver and sharp, like a fierce bird. As special models, these two spaceships were quite comfortable, especially the Queen's model. It could also circle Earth in 6 hours, while Diana's spaceship only needed 4 hours. It was just that they couldn't enter stealth mode while cruising at high speeds. In outer space, it would be very easy for the spaceships to travel to and from the solar system for a week without any problems. The Queen and Diana later learned this from the spaceship's AI program. For now, Luke just had the spaceships fly on autopilot to Paradise Island, and had Diana send him off in her ship. After a week-long break on Paradise Island, Luke felt it was time to throw himself into his new work. It didn't matter to him what the Queen and Diana thought. He would be in this DC universe for a long while. There was no need to rush to win the mother and daughter's favor. As the saying went, haste made waste. He was prepared for a protracted battle. In any case, there were still Master Wayne and Arthur, these two fat sheep. Luke had received news from an informant in Gotham City, which required him to get to work. There were some opportunities that might not come again once you missed the chance. The invitation which Diana had extended to Luke at that moment was timely, and he left Gotham above board, which effectively reduced Master Wayne's suspicions. Thinking this, Luke wasn't in a hurry to return to Gotham. Instead, he wandered around Europe. In the name of investing in or acquiring tech companies, he basically visited one or two companies every day. Luke couldn't be bothered to visit a big company himself, the negotiation team could deal with that. His targets were small companies that could be invested in or acquired. There was also precedent for him visiting them in person. In fact, Luke spent most of his time monitoring Gotham remotely. After all, the spatial barrier around Paradise Island interfered too much with external signals. If he didn't come out, he would miss the opening of a show. 2213 Side Story, Fantasy Journey 54. Thanks to Luke deliberating avoiding Gotham and Metropolis, a new undercurrent appeared in the two cities. Master Wayne had noticed this and had taken action, and him beating up bad guys made the news once again. However, Luke knew that Master Wayne had yet to find the main source, and was underestimating this hidden opponent. Then, on Valentine's Day, February 14th, a carefully planned performance finally kicked off. Although it was a holiday full of burning passion, it was still cold in the two cities next to the Atlantic Ocean. People on the streets wore thick winter coats, and couples snuggled with each other. In the afternoon, snow fell from the gloomy sky. For romantics, this was a beautiful omen. For the homeless, it would be a difficult night. They would also have to worry about where to stay for the next few nights. Shabby shacks made of plastic sheets and cardboard clearly weren't enough to keep out the snow and low temperatures. Master Wayne had a rare break today, and was dressed for a big dinner party for Gotham's upper class. Originally, this was a charity dinner to help the poor. Now, the host even added, people stranded by the snow, which could be considered keeping up with current events. In fact, the 200 or so upper-class members present had only donated more than $1 million in total. There was no way they would give more. It was just a gimmick. $1 million could be used to buy unsellable or inventory goods of participating companies that were present. This could significantly reduce costs, and was enough for the poor to quietly get through this sudden cold snowstorm. After that, what did that have to do with them? The overall economy wasn't in good shape, and plenty of capitalists went bankrupt. Anyone with a kinder heart could go help out. There would be no need to perform on this occasion. Even Master Wayne, who had donated the most, only spent $50,000 to buy a painting by a group of children from a welfare home. Under the supervision of his professional team, 80% of the money would go to the children in the welfare home. He couldn't care less about other people's donations. However, Master Wayne wasn't idle. He was so busy setting up the Justice League that he hadn't bothered to look for a date for this event this time. This would have been practically impossible in the past. As the head of Wayne Enterprises, Master Wayne always had enough beauties around him who were at his beck and call. It was just that there would be small problems every now and then. There would always be some women who would try to get a permanent credit card off him, preferably the kind that could be swiped with no limit. Of course, they were dreaming. Master Wayne had a professional team to help him with this sort of thing. Without a date, he was quickly surrounded by 3 beauties, and there were even more eyes fixed on him, ready to join in. Master Wayne barely needed to think to interact with these women. In any case, what they were interested in wasn't his eloquence, they would happily carry the conversation on their own. For some reason, in this grandiose environment, Master Wayne remembered a certain person who was still on a business trip in Europe. Previously, he had been troubled by this person running wild, but after more than 10 days of quiet, he felt that his surroundings had fallen into stagnant silence. It wasn't that people had stopped doing bad things, but that everything around him had returned to that lifeless atmosphere of decades ago, like the sludge at the bottom of a pit. There was no light, no prospects, and no future. Everyone was born and died in this rotten and filthy abyss. He envied Bale. Master Wayne was well aware of this, but he hadn't told anyone, including his butler and the other members of the Justice League. It wasn't because Bale was handsome or had stolen some of the limelight, it was because he brimmed with energy inside out. Another way to put it was that he was on an upward trend. Master Wayne got this feeling not just from the battles, but also based on what Luke's company was doing. Although Luke's expansion plan was still in its infancy, Master Wayne could already see some signs. The food delivery system which Luke had set up in Gotham and Metropolis could take in tens of thousands of people at the bottom who were willing to work. As long as Luke didn't take a huge cut, these people could at least earn enough to support their families. Luke moved at a steady and orderly pace, and didn't rush things at all. When he discussed it with Master Wayne, he had said bluntly, "Just change whatever can be changed. I'm not raising pigs. I may earn a little less, but if tens of thousands of people can benefit from this, how can I not be satisfied?" Old Master Wayne fell silent. Could he do that? No, that was because he wasn't that patient, nor did he have trusted subordinates. A system that involved tens of thousands of people also cost money to operate. Master Wayne was afraid that he would have to personally cripple a bunch of corrupt subordinates even before a system like this could be established. Luke said that he had a separate system which could monitor these people and prevent that from happening, but it wasn't something that could be used with other organizations. It was impossible for Master Wayne to set up a similar system himself. It would be too obvious that he was targeting Luke. So, he just personally invested $10 million in Luke's food delivery system as a sponsor. Luke also said that Master Wayne was free to monitor these two new companies at all times to prevent anything from slipping through the net. Master Wayne didn't really believe it, since Luke dared to promise him that nothing would go wrong and didn't explain the surveillance method. That just proved that there was indeed something fishy about this. It was very likely that it involved some underhanded trick, and it was very unlikely that most people would be able to escape such surveillance. That was also what puzzled Master Wayne. Could a person maintain inner calm while watching all sorts of evil deeds being committed and beating up bad guys? This required extremely tenacious conviction. Master Wayne knew what his conviction was, but he didn't know what Luke's conviction was. Also, this conviction wasn't something like belief in God, but some unique point. For a bad guy, it might be pain, and they wanted other people to feel the same sort of pain. Or perhaps it was a choice between life and death, or a choice between heaven and hell. This had to do with each person's own views and experiences. The conviction might look similar on the surface, but could be completely different on the inside. As a bystander, Master Wayne could only analyze it from various angles at most. He wasn't stupid enough to ask Luke what his conviction was. Just as he was using his ability to multitask to deal with the beautiful women and ponder life at the same time, there was a faint flurry of activity outside the banquet hall. The lively scene gradually quieted down, and many people looked inquiringly in the direction of the doors. Everyone here were bigwigs in Gotham. If they got even a little annoyed, the person in charge of the banquet would definitely reprimand the waiters and even cut their bonuses. The waiters near the doors immediately went out to check the situation, and were prepared to report back after they figured out what was going on. 2214 Side Story, Fantasy Journey 55. It wasn't long before the waiters came back. However, a large group of brawny men with guns came back with them. These armed men were clearly divided into two types. One group wore black masks and combat uniforms. They carried matching gear and moved in a very organized manner. There were about 20 of them. The other group was made up of almost 100 people of different sorts who carried all types of weapons. Most of the noise was caused by this second group. Of course, the upper class in the hall could only see a small number of them at first, but those who sensed that something wasn't right had already started moving toward various exit points. On the other hand, many of the women who had been brought here as trophy dates didn't react. Someone even exclaimed, "What's wrong? Why did you let these people in? Where are the security guards?" But these people kept pouring into the hall. Under the direction of the masked men, they spread out and quickly surrounded everyone in the hall. They didn't stand in a circle, like stupid criminals in the movies. They split up and blocked several exits. More than 10 criminals with guns also positioned themselves on the spiral staircases on both sides of the hall. The guests in the hall all felt that a disaster was imminent. Frowning, Master Wayne looked around the hall, which gradually filled with shouts and curses, before he quietly disappeared into a hallway on the second floor. He was much more vigilant than the naive upper crust. When he had sensed that something was wrong, he immediately slipped upstairs and broke away from the siege. A moment later, breaking news appeared on TVs in Metropolis and Gotham. Any TV that was on switched to this news, and a middle-aged fatso with a fanatical expression appeared on screen. He had messy hair and an unkempt beard. He was wearing a dirty plaid shirt under a work jacket. It was obvious that he was from the bottom of society. However, he spoke in a clear cadence. "Brothers and sisters, Today is a great day when us ordinary people rise up against our oppressors." As he spoke, the camera followed him as he moved, and zoomed in on the terrified and trembling members of high society and beautiful women behind him. "Do you see this? These are the rich men and women of Gotham and Metropolis. They're raising money for us who are starving and freezing on the streets." The fatso raised a list and waved it at the camera. "Let's see the results of their goodwill. Wow, unbelievable. It's actually $1,213,800. Thank you to these 500 rich and kind-hearted people for forking out such a huge amount of money. I'm so touched." He turned around and pointed. "Of course, I might be more touched if this CEO of Bard Corporation, who controls our electricity, wasn't wearing a watch with a starting price of $3.6 million. Then, he moved his round, black finger. "Also, this water company heiress is wearing a diamond necklace worth $1.7 million, this custom-made suit is worth $200,000, this tie clip is worth $30,000, this pair of leather shoes is worth $20,000, fine, I admit I'm a bit of a boor, I suddenly don't feel good." His smile turned fierce. "Look at these people. They suck blood from our daily necessities, but have never once cared that we're tainted and fall sick thanks to their factory waste. They just need to fork out one leather shoe's worth of money at the right time to get rid of poor people like us." The fatso's voice grew louder and more agitated. He waved his hand, and two brawny men appeared on camera with a petite woman held up between them. "What do they rely on? It's not just their money, but also these lackeys who work for their money." As he spoke, he exerted strength and tore off most of the woman's evening gown. Although it was violent, many men couldn't help but widen their eyes in front of their TVs. Then, most people were dumbfounded, and many of them couldn't help but retch. The fatso was so agitated that he used too much strength, and the bra under the evening gown was pulled down to the woman's abdomen. It wasn't snow-white peaks that appeared on camera, but a furry, black, flat chest, even a pair of boxers was half exposed. So, it wasn't a woman at all, but a man. The audience in front of the TV felt a little nauseated, mainly because the difference in expectations was too big. Clearly, the fatso and the others hadn't known either. The two brawny men who were holding the crossdresser looked conflicted. The fatso was about to say something, when he realized that the expressions of the people around him weren't right. Turning around, he couldn't help but retch and curse. "FCK, retch, what the hell is this?" Only after he was done cursing did he feel that he was ruining his performance. The fatso hurriedly diverted everyone's attention. "See that? For money, these people can even pretend to be women to protect these rich people." However, after saying that, he felt disgusted again, and simply jumped to the next step. "But now, their owners are in our hands. I declare that from tonight onward, anyone can go to their homes or their companies, and squeeze everything out of them. And I'll be here to ensure that they agree to this, largest charity donation in American history." The fatso's eyes were full of excitement and fanaticism. "Go, guys, take back everything that should have belonged to you in the first place. This world will ultimately belong to us. Make America great again." After that, the criminals surrounding the upper class started to beat them up on the live feed and tear off the valuables they were wearing. Whether intentionally or otherwise, expensive watches, jewelry, suits and leather shoes were flashed in front of the camera, and the criminals who got them shouted excitedly, "We're rich. I've never worn a watch worth millions in my life. These leather shoes, they're not as comfortable as commemorative sneakers." The fatso immediately gave the crossdresser a dark look. This D*MN pervert had almost ruined his perfect performance. Thankfully, he had held back from throwing up on the spot. Gritting his teeth, he tilted his head at the two brawny men. "String this guy up at the entrance and teach him a lesson, the especially miserable kind." The two brawny men looked at each other in bewilderment. How miserable was that? In any case, they still dragged this cross-dressing bigshot out. A moment later, there was a cry of pain outside the door. "Ah, no, I'm not a bodyguard, I'm just a corporate spy who came in to take sneak shots." 2215 Side story, Fantasy Journey 56 inches. Do you think we're stupid? Would a corporate spy carry a gun on them? The two brawny men didn't believe him. They aimed at the crossdresser's half-naked body with feathers they had just plucked from the head of some socialite. The crossdresser twisted wildly and howled, half crying and half laughing. Really, that's just a tranquilizer gun." The two brawny men looked at each other, then shrugged and didn't stop. The gun had already been taken away after it was confiscated, they couldn't be bothered to find out if it was true. It didn't matter who or what this pervert was. What was important was that he had disgusted their boss, so they had to torture him. A few minutes later, the fatso, Sonny, walked out after his performance. He looked like a brand new man. Leather shoes worth over 20,000, a tie clip worth over 30,000, a suit worth 200,000, and a watch worth over 3 million made him look like an upstart. After all, the shoes and clothes were custom made, and the original owner was taller and lankier than he was. Sonny had no choice but to leave the front of the suit open and walk around with his big belly sticking out. Seeing the two brawny men torture the crossdresser, his eyes widened. WTF? The two lackeys turned around and said smugly, "Boss, this was how you extorted a confession last time. It's really effective." Sonny's mouth moved several times, but he suddenly felt that he had nothing to say. Having a bunch of stupid lackeys was something he had gotten used to over the last few years. He could only ask subconsciously, did he say anything? His two subordinates shook their heads. All he did was laugh. He's a corporate spy who came in to take sneak shots. Sonny lost interest when he heard that. He raised his gun. The operation is about to start. We don't have time to waste on him. Wait, I have information. Since the two brawny men had stopped tickling him, the crossdresser was able to catch his breath, and he hurriedly said, "I have information that's useful to you." Speak. Sonny didn't put his gun down. His mind was already on what might happen later. As long as this pervert's words were useless, he would be killed immediately. This cross-dressing big shot said, "I have a video of the party tonight. It's a video of them talking about how the charity donations will turn into expired goods from various companies for you to eat." Sonny put down his gun. "Where is it?" The crossdresser was conflicted, but when he saw Sonny about to raise his gun again, he hurriedly shouted, "Boxers. The memory card is in my boxers." Sonny waved his hand. "Search him." The two brawny men looked disgusted, but when they saw how the gun in their boss's hand seemed to be getting restless, they stepped forward and pulled off the man's boxers. "Got it, boss." A few seconds later, one of the men retreated as he held his breath, and he held out a small black memory card. Sonny stepped back. "You hang onto it first." Pondering for a few seconds, he then waved his hand. "Bring this pervert down and take him inside. Get someone to upload the video online." The two brawny men nodded, and the one whose hands were still free couldn't help but mutter, "If I had known, I would have made him take out the card himself." The man with the card, "Why didn't you say so earlier? I've already FC King touched him several times. I have to go to the bathroom later to wash my hands." "No, I have to wash my hands twice." Several hundred meters away from the banquet hall, on the Batplane that had just arrived, Master Wayne had just put on the Batman suit. If it were before, he would have definitely rushed back to his base to change into his armor before coming out again. Now that he had the nanosuit on him, he simply found a room with no surveillance cameras and activated stealth mode, then had the remote-controlled plane fly over, before he changed into his armor on it. This way, the chances of his secret identity being leaked were low, plus it saved him time. As he changed, he looked at the screen on the fighter plane, which was playing the live feed from the TV channels. That crossdresser didn't affect him at all. There were many more perverted guys in Gotham. To be precise, this crossdresser could indeed be called a pervert, but supervillains could only be called brutal. As he put on his armor, he asked, "Victor, are you here?" "Here." At the reply, there was a small blaze on the ground. It was none other than Victor. Luke and Diana were in Europe, Arthur was in the Mediterranean, and Barry was busy with his father's lawsuit in Central City today. So far, no supervillains had appeared tonight. Master Wayne and Victor, plus logistics support from the butler, would be enough to take care of everything. Victor suddenly frowned. "They're actually putting bombs on the people in the hall. What should we do?" Master Wayne also frowned when he saw the live feed. It wasn't unjust for the people inside to die, but it would cause a lot of chaos. If the Justice League was implicated in the matter of Gotham's upper-class society being wiped out in one go, it would be very easy for them to become hostile toward the Justice League. After all, this was a class that had the right to speak, and was very sensitive about this sort of thing. For example, there had been a lot of demonstrations in front of the White House in Luke's previous life, but what about at Wall Street? It wasn't long before NYPD came out to beat people up and arrest them. Master Wayne couldn't help but mutter, "It would be good if Barry was here. His speed would solve a lot of problems." Victor nodded in agreement, but still proposed another option. Why don't we contact Superman? Master Wayne turned around and looked at Metropolis. He should already know, but he wasn't here. Victor had a bad feeling. With Superman's speed, it wouldn't take him more than 10 seconds to arrive, and that was counting the time he took to avoid the crowd and change into his costume. In the end, Master Wayne was someone who had dealt with many major events on his own before. He put away his unrealistic thoughts. We can't just wait for them. We have to think of another way. Can we interfere with the detonators? Victor said, it's possible. The interference device that Knight gave me should be useful. Master Wayne relaxed. Then let's follow this plan. In the night sky, the two of them wrote and drew on the virtual screen in the Batplane. They weren't in a hurry to join the battlefield. As the saying went, the more you did, the more mistakes you could make. If the rescue operation failed, it would have been better not to take action at all. Besides, it seemed that the criminals had another plan for these upper-class individuals and socialites who had become hostages. There was no need to worry about their lives being in danger for the time being. If a few of them really were killed beforehand, that was their bad luck. In this world, it was impossible for Superman to save everyone. While they were discussing the rescue plan, things were already starting to happen in Gotham and Metropolis. The initial instigation and temptation that was broadcast, followed by the explosive video taken by the cross-dressing Big Shot, had already ignited the anger of a lot of people at the bottom. Riots were on the verge of breaking out in the two cities. 2216 Side Story, Fantasy Journey 57. Master Wayne and Victor were well aware of the situation, but didn't dwell on it. Riots were nothing new in this dark America. In the past, Master Wayne had only focused on dealing with leaders and small gangs which stood out too much. There wasn't much more he could do. This wasn't something that could be resolved by beating up people. Only the availability of more jobs could reduce the frequency and scale of the riots. In short, it still came down to money, wages, living expenses. As the saying went, only when living standards were high would people care more about moral standards. If they didn't have money, they couldn't be blamed for crowdfunding. Superman was also aware of the situation, but there was nothing he could do. Once the bottom rung of society was provoked as a collective, they were the hardest thing to deal with. He could attack bad guys, but he couldn't beat up everyone on the bottom rung. Everybody in the world knew that Superman was a saint. All Superman could do was put out the fires and stop atrocities that crossed the line. That was why he had no time to go to the charity party and rescue people. Actually, after seeing the second video, Superman was fully disgusted by the people at the charity party. Although the criminals had deliberately guided the course of events tonight, the root cause was that the upper class of Gotham and Metropolis had too low a bottom line. Superman was already restrained in not dealing with these black-hearted guys, to say nothing of wasting time rescuing them when he could be saving civilians instead. Besides, a spark could set a prairie ablaze. Once the fire started, the offenders who started it were no longer important. Even if they were all killed in one go, the chaos in the two cities would continue. It wasn't until the people had vented most of their anger that things would come to a gradual end. In this regard, Superman, along with Master Wayne and Victor, wouldn't waste unnecessary energy. Otherwise, Superman wouldn't be revered as a god by the people at the bottom, but as a dirty thug of the capitalists. During this chaos, several hundred cars slipped under the radar and quietly drove into the two cities. Most of them stopped in residential areas in the busiest business districts. The former had a lot of residents, while the latter sold cheap basic necessities. At that moment, there were multiple fires burning throughout Metropolis. Then, some kids just had to target a chemicals warehouse in the port on the outskirts. There was a small explosion when they were moving goods, and a fire broke out. A pungent smell wafted out of the warehouse, and traces of explosive chemicals and gas were mixed into the smoke every now and then. This was an extremely dangerous situation, and Superman immediately rushed over. Superman, who was busy putting out fires and saving people, no longer had the energy to check the cars on the road, nor did he notice that some of the cars were lined with thin lead plates and contained timed explosives. Big riots were not uncommon, but the number of people who died in a riot that involved hundreds of thousands of people was in the single digits most of the time. Dozens of deaths were rare. In the end, the people at the bottom were still very practical. Since they had the stamina, they should just use it to go $0 shopping and cart goods home. Few people would actually go out looking to fight and kill. That was also why Superman and Master Wayne didn't dwell on the matter. But Master Wayne soon received bad news. The Joker had appeared on the streets of Gotham, and a growing crowd was following him. Looking at the image captured on a police camera of his old enemy's wicked smile, Master Wayne felt very uneasy. He knew this archenemy too well. This one person could unknowingly control the behavior of many others. What was even more frightening was that this guy didn't have the weaknesses of an ordinary human. Unlike most supervillains, it wasn't the killing itself that was fun for the Joker, everything was just a way for him to look for fun. If he could achieve his goal by killing just one person or not killing anyone at all, he wouldn't waste time killing hundreds of people. At that moment, the criminals at the charity party started to grab hostages and get into various cars. The waiters at the party were ordered to drive the cars. If the waiters didn't want the bombs on the upper class to be triggered, they would drive obediently and not run. The criminals, on the other hand, got into the cars which belonged to the upper class. Many of them were luxury cars with sunroofs, and they escorted the cars that the waiters were driving with guns aimed at the convoy on both sides. It was practically impossible for the hostages to bribe the waiters to drive away. Master Wayne and Victor frowned. The bombs' detonation signal could be blocked, but the bullets couldn't. Many of the upper class used bulletproof cars, but the windows were now all down. On the other side, the Joker was on live TV. The TV crew that was being held hostage started to broadcast the opening speech for tonight's farce. The Joker smiled. "Batman, I know you're watching me. So, I just want to tell you that tonight, our game has started." Victor couldn't help but raise his head and look at Master Wayne's face. He seemed fine. It seemed that Bruce had become more well-adjusted mentally recently. The Joker snapped his fingers, and another image appeared on the TV screen. It was the convoy of cars, which was being filmed from a TV helicopter. "These are guests A for tonight's game." He then pointed at the riled-up crowd in front of him. "And these are guests B." Grabbing a rifle from one of his men, he fired. The crowd subconsciously fell silent. The Joker raised his voice. "Everyone, the richest people in Gotham are coming. Have you thought of what you're going to do with them?" The crowd was even quieter. A moment later, it exploded as countless people screamed, "Kill them! Kill them! Hang those slave owners! These rich people deserve to die. None of them are good." The Joker looked back at the camera. "Now, are you going to save guests or forgive guests B? Batman, come and tell me." Although the last sentence was drowned out by the shouts around the Joker, Master Wayne, who was staring at his old opponent, knew what he was saying. Victor glanced at Master Wayne again, only to see that his expression was still all right. "So, do you have a countermeasure?" Master Wayne shook his head calmly. "No, but it's going to happen anyway, so it's useless to worry." "Then you better think of one right now, or I'll have to do something about that convoy." A voice rang out outside the fighter plane. They raised their heads as Superman slowly descended. Master Wayne curled his lip and opened the front of the plane. "You can actually come through the back. In any case, you have plane clearance." Superman had a strange look on his face. "What use is your clearance to me?" 2217 Side Story. Fantasy Journey 58. After a discussion, or rather, the two big shots discussed, and Victor minded his own business, Superman finally didn't take action. That was because Master Wayne had said very calmly, "Nobody knows the Joker better than I do. If you take action directly, you'll only step into his trap, and the consequences will be even worse. Then, you'll realize that you're being forced step by step into a desperate situation." Superman couldn't say anything in response. That was because Gotham was Master Wayne's territory. Given the tacit understanding between the two big shots, they rarely stepped into each other's cities. This was mainly when it came to fighting crime. There was no problem in Superman saving people around the world. On the other hand, law and order in Metropolis was clearly much better than in Gotham, and the people at the bottom were at least several times happier. To some extent, most of the bad guys and scum in Metropolis were diverted to Gotham. Although Batman broke bones at the smallest thing, it was much better than Superman monitoring the entire city and easily destroying their businesses. Putting everything together, Superman really didn't know much about Gotham's supervillains. But he knew about Batman and the Joker's years of entanglement. There were a few times when the Joker had Batman by the neck and forced him to make a choice. Superman felt that if he were Batman, he would probably have retired after one round. There was really no solution to how the Joker played with human nature. It was just like that famous question about who to save between your mother and your girlfriend. Any choice you made definitely wouldn't end well. Saving who lived equals choosing who died. No matter what you chose, you would be scolded for being inhumane. This wasn't about how virtuous you were, but how malicious the instigator was. That was because both choices were wrong. Whatever you did would be wrong. You were doomed to get 0 points. For some reason, Master Wayne had calmed down a lot recently. It seemed it happened not long after he met Luke. In the past, when he encountered a situation like this, he would be agitated and anxious as he tried to think of a way to deal with the Joker. Now, he was still in the mood to explain to Superman and Victor, "Look, what has happened so far has nothing to do with us, but the Joker came out on live TV to say that this is all for the sake of messing with me. He clearly wants me to step in. Given his ways, he won't let me have an easy time of it. He'll definitely have more tricks up his sleeve." Both Superman and Victor nodded silently. There were indeed idiots among the supervillains, but that definitely didn't include the Joker. At Master Wayne's explanation, they were able to detach themselves from the matter and see the bigger picture. The later I show up, the less room the Joker will have to maneuver. Master Wayne checked his equipment. "So, Superman, continue saving people. I'll have Victor let you know if you're really needed." He raised his head and smiled. "Don't forget that Barry is already on a plane. He'll be here in half an hour at most. Bale is also on his way back from Europe. He won't take more than 2 hours." He sat down in the pilot's seat and closed the front of the plane. "Time is on our side, so there's no rush. Superman, then can't you let me out first before you close the door?" Master Wayne curled his lip and pressed a button. "I told you, you can go through the back door." Superman looked at the open back door. "Thanks for the reminder." On a street in the center of Gotham, a criminal in a clown mask approached the Joker. "Boss, the convoy has been blocked again." Standing on the steps in front of a building, the Joker looked at the people looting shops around him and didn't think much of it. "What is it this time?" The criminal said, "We ran into 2 groups of people fighting. They burned a few cars and blocked the road." The Joker rubbed his toes lightly on the smooth marble floor. "What a coincidence." With that, his eyes went blank and he fell silent for a long while. The criminals didn't dare say anything and just stood there obediently. Suddenly, the Joker sighed. "Batman, why are you so disobedient?" The Joker said, "Go and clear the way with the babies you stole." The criminal said, "Yes, boss." He then turned around and left. A moment later, 2 excavators drove out of a nearby street and headed straight for the convoy of cars. The Joker moved down the steps as if he were dancing. "This is the best of times, this is the worst of times. Bruce baby, come and have fun with me." The dozens of men in clown masks around the stairs turned a blind eye to the boss's behavior. "Don't bother with what the boss does, just ask him what he wants you to do." That was their rule. Those who didn't abide by this rule were quick to die. Earlier on, Victor had just blown up a few cars from the Batplane to create a traffic jam. Now, he didn't forget to let Bruce know. "Bruce, I've done my best, but it seems that the Joker was prepared. They have excavators. Do you want me to destroy them?" Master Wayne looked at the Joker dancing below him. "No need. He'll use even more extreme methods to force me out otherwise, which doesn't fit with our plan to buy time." Victor said, "But, letting the convoy through won't buy us time either, right?" Hearing that, Master Wayne smiled coldly. "Over 200 rich people is also a way to buy time." Victor couldn't help but shiver at these dark words. "Are you sure? What if he goes on a killing spree?" Master Wayne's smile turned even colder. "If he kills too many people, why should I show myself? Batman can be late, too. It's impossible to stop all crime." Victor suddenly remembered what Luke had said in his lesson a while ago, "The more you do, the more mistakes you make. If you don't do anything, you won't make any mistakes." He now had some idea of what Luke meant. As long as the Joker killed too many of the upper class before Master Wayne arrived, it would be equivalent to the Joker taking the blame. After that, no matter how the Joker tried to drag Master Wayne through the mud, it would be twice as hard. It was like many hostage situations, where the criminals killed the hostages one by one instead of massacring them. The lives of the hostages were chips in a game. If a hostage died, the offender had less leverage, and the police would counterattack even more fiercely. It was only reasonable to use as few chips as possible to force the police to give in. This was a mind game. The difference was that the Joker and Batman weren't ordinary people, and human lives weren't that important to them. If the Joker's opponent was Superman, he might have succeeded. Unfortunately, the Joker's favorite had always been Batman. He wasn't interested in dull, saintly superheroes at all. It was like how many experts in the industry were too lazy to compete with rookies, because they didn't have to stretch themselves in a competition. It wasn't fun for the experts at all. The Joker and Batman were both skilled players, and could be considered evenly matched. Only then could things be fun. 2218 Side Story. Fantasy Journey 59. While the two psychos fought a battle of wits and cold chicken, the city had already turned into a merry sea. Countless people who felt that their homes were short of food, medicine, appliances, furniture, and phones ran to shops in the commercial district. Break down the door, charge in, grab whatever you see. This was the best shopping experience they ever had. Of course, birds of a feather flocked together. Everybody wanted something valuable. What if it was already in someone else's hands? Naturally, snatch it from the other party. However, these were basically ordinary people who had been incited for the moment, while there were many small groups who were prepared. A group of people wearing masks for Spider-Man, Iron Man, Thor, the Hulk, the Black Widow and so on rushed into a comic store and cheered. My Spider-Man figurine, hooray! FCK, ah, my Black Widow bolster. FCK, OMG, my wife, Masaka. FCK, FCK, FFF, hooray. Stuff yourselves to death. As they spoke, everybody started to grab the figurines and accessories they couldn't afford and which they had already targeted beforehand. After a long while, this FFF group, which had grabbed countless wives, came out of the comic store. Suddenly, their surroundings felt a little quiet. It was still faintly noisy in some shops, but at this intersection in the city center, a lot of people had shut up, and many more were surreptitiously slipping away. Following most people's gazes, the FFF saw a figure in a black cape standing opposite another figure in a purple suit on a flight of stairs several meters above ground level. Batman, FFF's Iron Man, exclaimed. His voice attracted a lot of attention, and his companions were so frightened that they berated him in low voices. Shut up, Summer. Do you want someone to steal our wives? As it turned out, these nerds of the FFF were overthinking things. The people around them only glanced at them before they looked away and mocked inwardly. They came out at night to steal toys. They were crazy. At the center of attention on the street, Batman and the Joker looked at each other from 10 meters away. The difference was that Master Wayne's cape fluttered in the cold snowy wind, while the Joker paced back and forth with a puzzled expression. Something's wrong with you. Master Wayne remained indifferent. He was trying to buy time. Talking less didn't make him any less cool. Let me guess what made you change. The Joker continued pacing. It's your friends. It's not Superman, he doesn't have that ability. That tough woman, you're probably not her type. Dark Knight, wow, I think I hit on something. Master Wayne remained unperturbed. It wasn't strange for the Joker to say whatever. In front of this lunatic, you definitely revealed less if you said nothing, especially when Master Wayne's helmet also covered his face, and he remained motionless. The Joker stopped talking and sighed. Why are you so serious? We should have gotten a good start tonight. He waved his hand impatiently, as if to shake off something. It's a pity that your Shadow Knight is still in Europe and won't be able to make it back in time for this game. Maybe I'll play the next round with him, and he'll be more cooperative. When he waved his hand, troops of criminals pushed the socialists forward. These lavishly dressed men and women were now as obedient as quails. They had no choice but to be obedient. Just now, in order to force Master Wayne out, the Joker had already thrown a dozen of their comrades to the surrounding thugs. Unlike those at the bottom who specialized in small-scale looting, these people also wanted money, but were more inclined to destruction and slaughter. Furthermore, the socialites who had been thrown into the crowd had a lot of cash stuffed on them. Even if it wasn't wads, but small rolls, tens of millions of dollars falling off a person was enough to stimulate the crowd's beastly nature. Not to mention, the socialites who were wearing thin clothing all had outstanding looks and figures. If they weren't outstanding, they weren't qualified to attend a charity party of that level. The crowd reached out for these living moneybags. In just a few minutes, more than 10 bodies appeared on the ground. These thugs didn't know who had done it, but these unlucky upper-class individuals died just like that. The other hostages were instantly terrified. Those who could reach their level weren't idiots, not even the socialites. Women with low IQ and EQ couldn't play around in this social circle at all. Those who thought that they could make big money by spreading their legs, or those who were naive enough to anticipate falling in love with someone rich, were doomed to become dirty secrets and would have no chance of entering upper-class society. To reach the top in any industry, a person had to have top-notch relevant professional skills. Of course, there might be women whose faces and bodies could insta-kill most men, like Helen of Troy, who had triggered the Trojan War. But even Luke, who had roamed several universes, had never seen such an existence. Diana and Mara were already the most beautiful women he had ever seen, but were they enough to make most men give up everything? Sorry, those nerds who were furtively hugging their figurines wouldn't agree. The members of this FCK group actually weren't interested in real women. Wasn't it nicer to go home and sleep with their wife pillow? Lazar Piago, who was wearing the Black Widow mask and holding a bunch of half-naked Black Widow figurines, suddenly stopped. FCK, wait, I think I see someone I know. Everybody stopped and looked in the direction he was pointing. FCK, big brother, that's Miss Aoi. Hesher Piago, who was wearing the Hulk mask and holding wife Masaka, cried out. FCK, Miss Aoi, that cross-dressing big shot on TV. I thought I was seeing things. Wicked, who was wearing the Thor mask, also cursed. The nerd subconsciously looked at Lazar. Lazar looked conflicted. He looked at Miss Aoi, who was surrounded by a bunch of armed thugs, before he finally turned around, and saw a bunch of people staring at him. What? Wicked reminded him, Lazar, don't you like cross-dressing with Miss Aoi the most? You also said that brothers should stick together. Lazar got angry. That's cross-dressing. You don't do it all the time, but don't you cosplay your wives at comic conventions? That's a bunch of criminals with guns. What can I do? Everybody was still looking at him. After all, although Lazar was a little unrestrained and lecherous, he had always been their leader. He was the one who had suggested stealing their wives tonight. Lazar sighed helplessly and turned in Miss Aoi's direction. He lowered his head. Then, let's pray that God can bring Miss Aoi back alive. Everybody was speechless. That's so half-assed. How can you let down a good friend whom you cross-dress with? 2219 Side Story. Fantasy Journey 60. As if he knew what everybody was thinking. Big boss, Lazar added, as long as he returns, I'll give him a Black Widow mug. I swear, everybody could be sincere when they prayed, but to give up their wives. Sorry, even if it was just something with an image of their wife on it, that would be too forgiving and kind. They wouldn't accept it. They really only prayed, lit a candle for the unlucky Miss Aoi for 5 seconds before they all turned around and quickly slipped away. What a joke. Nobody wanted to be the next Miss Aoi. It would be too stupid to die in this sort of meaningless mess before they had played with their wives. It had to be said that this FFF team was indeed smart. In the time it had taken them to come out, stop and pray, the Joker's traditional performance had already taken place. He took out 2 remotes, one white and one black, and walked over to Master Wayne. Now, I'll give you the choice. Press the white button, and you'll be able to save these rich pigs. Press the black button, and you'll be able to kill all my men in tonight's operation. His big red mouth opened wide. He slowly stuffed the 2 remotes into Master Wayne's hands, the white one in his left hand and the black one in his right. Looking at Master Wayne, who didn't move, the Joker couldn't help but lean forward to murmur in his ear, let me give you a hint. Heaven on the left, hell on the right. Good luck, Bruce baby. Then, he frowned. Usually, Master Wayne would hit him at this time. Even though the Joker had the upper hand, they both knew that he wouldn't mobilize his plan over just a few punches from Master Wayne. The Joker had never factored that into any of his plans. He himself was a bargaining chip. Otherwise, Master Wayne might not be interested in playing with him just to resolve a hostage crisis. But now, Master Wayne just looked at him coldly. His lenses flashed with a bluish-white light, indicating a fluctuation in his mood, but that was all. A Bruce who didn't do anything was too boring. The Joker waited for a moment before he walked down the steps listlessly. Everyone, it's showtime. Just do it. The thugs simply nodded and started to push the upper class into the crowd. Looking at the men and women who were crying in panic and the thugs who were yelling excitedly, and then at the 2 remotes in his hands, Master Wayne suddenly smiled. Sorry, I won't play with you this time. As soon as he said that, he casually threw away the 2 remotes, as if he were throwing away the shackles that bound him. His entire body relaxed. The Joker, who had only walked a few meters, turned around in surprise. "What did you say?" Master Wayne walked over and punched him in the face. The Joker's vision turned dark, and he swayed before he collapsed. He heard Mr. Wayne's cold voice. "Just wait. I'll specially set up a dark room in Arkham for you to perform for yourself." As the Joker fell, Master Wayne's cape fluttered as he charged at the thugs. Bombs. That didn't matter. It was good if these people could be rescued, but if they couldn't, that was because it was the thugs who had pressed the button. It had nothing to do with Mr. Wayne. He simply picked up his pace and charged at the horde. The thugs were shocked by Batman's sudden appearance and were a little scared. Batman had built a reputation on beating up thousands of criminals, and at that moment, they were about to commit a crime. But Master Wayne had been forced out by the Joker under duress. He deliberately stalled for time before confronting the Joker, and had completely ignored everyone else. In this gambling game, these guys couldn't even be considered bargaining chips. At most, they were poker cards. The outcome of the game was related to them, but after they were used, they were worthless, and could be thrown into the trash. At that moment, these cards were about to be flipped open, but Master Wayne wasn't interested in continuing, and chose to directly flip the table over instead. The table was flipped over, and the cards on it were sent flying. That was right, they were literally sent flying. After obtaining the high-powered battery from Luke, Master Wayne's research team had been trying to completely integrate it into the armor. So far, progress had been good. Master Wayne's armor already had most of the traits of a mechanical frame, like the exertion of force. Compared with before, when he relied primarily on his own movements, the mechanical frame in his armor was now the main source of power. The impact of a punch which weighed a ton wasn't a dream. He barely consumed any energy when beating people up with his fists and feet. The thugs who swarmed over were easily sent flying, and they fell into the crowd behind them. At first, the thugs didn't think much of it. In any case, it was the people in front who were being beaten up. But as Master Wayne turned into an emotionless punching machine and punched one thug one after another for a few minutes, the thugs couldn't take it anymore. Most of them didn't feel anything when 10 or 20 of them were trampled under the feet of their temporary comrades. But what about 100 to 200 of them? They were all lying on the ground in a mess. Those who rushed over directly tripped and fell one after another. Of the hundreds of thugs, a few dozen unlucky B***stars were dragged into the crowd. The lucky ones were just covered by a mountain of flesh, and were only injured at most. It was still too early for them to die. The remaining hundreds of thugs on the street couldn't help but retreat. Being beaten up wasn't a big deal, but Batman, who was now a cold, efficient and tough machine, was a pain. In just a few minutes, these people, too, would fall. They were here to vent, not to let Batman, their nemesis, vent on them. At that moment, it was as if these thugs recalled Batman's glorious achievements during his rule over Gotham for more than a decade. They looked at Master Wayne warily and fearfully, but without hate. After all, many of them had actually been Batman fans before tonight. It was just that thanks to the instigation of others, they had chosen to vent their frustrations from their daily lives tonight. Now that Batman had chased down hundreds of people and beaten them up in public, it was as if these temporary thugs had been hit in the head, and they suddenly sobered up. Victor couldn't help but send this big shot some praise. "Wow, bro, you're so cool." Master Wayne didn't relax. Instead, he raised his head and looked around. Victor found that odd. "What's wrong, Master Wayne?" "I don't know, but the Joker's game isn't this simple." Speechless for a moment, Victor asked tentatively, "Maybe he found your response this time unexpected." Master Wayne shook his head again. "Have you ever gone fishing?" Victor's father was obsessed with research and had no interest in fishing. Naturally, he wouldn't take his son out to fish. The young Victor also preferred more physical sport, so he could only reply awkwardly, "Does scooping up goldfish with a net count?" 2220 Side Story. Fantasy Journey 61. After a brief silence, Master Wayne explained, "You know the barb on a fish hook, right?" Victor said, "Yes." Master Wayne said, "The Joker's plan is the fish hook. Even if the fish can struggle and break free, it's at the price of its flesh being ripped open. It's impossible for it to escape unharmed." As he spoke, he looked around at Gotham. "Does it look like I'm in that bad a state right now?" Victor said, "Got it. I'll increase surveillance of important locations in Gotham right away." Master Wayne nodded and raised his fists. Sensing that his youthful body was still full of energy, he looked at the thugs who were slowly retreating. He smiled. There's nothing to be gained from beating you up, but it won't take much effort anyway. The thugs here were far more of a threat to the safety of ordinary people than the looters. The people who ran away would spread the word that Batman had beaten up hundreds of thugs, so Master Wayne felt that he could make use of this trash. A few minutes later, more than 400 criminals and thugs lay scattered all over the streets. These unlucky B***stards finally had a breather when Victor reported in with news. "Bruce, something isn't right at Arkham. The drones are showing that the patrol guards inside are gone." Old Master Wayne's heart jumped. He threw out his grappling hook and jumped onto the invisible batplane that was waiting here. He jumped into the plane. Even before it fully closed, the plane made a sharp turn and flew toward the outskirts of Gotham, but Master Wayne and Victor stopped before they got to Arkham Asylum. Before the drones that were facing in Arkham's direction left, they caught a lot of chaos, and a few faces at the scene were especially clear. Master Wayne immediately understood what the Joker was up to tonight. This guy had drawn his attention away in order to let out a bunch of his old acquaintances from Arkham. Worst of all, these old acquaintances weren't empty-handed. In front of a buffed-up Master Wayne, they wouldn't fall any slower than the hundreds of street thugs if they were empty-handed. But all these guys were actually wearing their usual gear and holding weapons. Master Wayne hadn't been stupid enough to leave these things in Arkham. They should have been in confidential police storage. It was also for this reason that Master Wayne had immediately recognized them. At first glance, he saw Two-Face, Poison Ivy, Zaz, Clayface, Professor Pig, and Solomon Grundy. But Master Wayne didn't need to think to know that there were even more old acquaintances hiding somewhere plotting something big. These guys here were good at fighting and killing, but they weren't smart enough. Most of the old acquaintances whom Master Wayne had thrown into Arkham were better at plots and machinations, like Bane, the Scarecrow, the Penguin, the Mad Hatter, and also that dumbass Riddler. And those were just the worst ones, those who didn't make the ranks, but who had ruthless methods, flashed on the drone feed every now and then. The AI surveillance program noted them, marked them, and started tracking them. It didn't matter if it lost track of them, but if it didn't, Master Wayne would just cripple each one he saw. Although these guys could still slowly recover after being crippled, they would be obedient for a year or so before that. He wouldn't kill them. Master Wayne would never kill anyone in his life. He had already crossed too many bottom lines. If he crossed even this last one, he was afraid that he would become the next Joker. Besides, he now had a new, ruthless teammate. That guy had done a lot of sneaky things, and several high-ranking gang members in Gotham had gone missing one after another. Master Wayne only gave a few warnings before he stopped pursuing the matter. He didn't kill people himself, but he couldn't ask his teammates not to. Take Diana, for example. She had joined the battlefield in World War I. Even if 1,000 Germans hadn't died at her hands, there had to be at least 800. What right did a youngster like Master Wayne have to request that the princess refrain from killing? At that moment, Barry's voice rang out feebly over the comms. "Well, I'm in Gotham. What should I do now?" Master Wayne was delighted when he heard Barry. "Let's meet up, and we'll work to rescue people." Barry. No problem. With Barry, this super rescuer, Master Wayne was no longer afraid of those supervillains grabbing people to use against him. "Once night is here, I can go all out," he couldn't help but murmur inwardly. Compared with Barry, who specialized in saving people, and Victor, who was far better at tech support than actual combat, Luke, who had no shortcomings in all aspects, could completely be the second focal point. If something happened to Master Wayne, Luke could directly replace him as the commander and become the main focal point. This was really important in a battle against supervillains. Who the hell knew how many strange tricks those lunatics who had been sitting around for a long time had prepared for Master Wayne. While Master Wayne was scanning the illustrious members of Arkham, Luke silently looked away from him. Then, he wrapped his ragged denim jacket around him and waved the half-meter-long iron pipe in his hand. As he shouted, "Charge! Charge!" around him, there were similar cries. "Loot the place. There's a phone store over there. And the latest tablet. I want AFC King X model game console." At this last shout, a surprised Luke turned in the direction of a certain nerd, and saw a half-naked Black Widow figurine in a bizarre pose inside a semi-transparent travel bag. Sister Widow's leg-to-height ratio didn't seem right. Also, her assets stood out too much. They were a little too exaggerated. What was even more outrageous was that this guy who was shouting about stealing a game console was actually wearing a Black Widow mask. Luke almost hit him in the face with the pipe he was holding. How dare he dishonor a beautiful agent like that? As for the people with him who were wearing Iron Man, Thor, the Hulk and Spider-Man masks, forget it. In any case, these people didn't rely on looks to make a living. With complicated feelings, he followed these fake, old teammates, into the mall. Not far from the entrance on the first floor was a brand phone store which also sold tablets and game consoles. This was one of the few high-end stores in Gotham, so it had all the goods. Because of this reputation, it finally attracted disaster tonight. A swarm of people poured in and reached for anything they were interested in. Just as the shopping spree was about to start, the bright lights in the mall suddenly turned dim, and a faint green light enveloped the crowd on the first floor. 2221 Side story, Fantasy Journey 62. It had to be said that a mob mentality indeed led to lower intelligence. In a group, most people would give up on thinking deeper and just follow what other people did. A small portion could still think for themselves, while most would still hesitate, and only a very few would react in a quick and logical way. At that moment, the hundreds of people who had swarmed the first floor saw that the mall lights had basically gone out and instead were replaced with a lot of green lights. Only a few thought of safety first and slipped out. After all, there were plenty of other shops in Gotham that they could enter tonight. There was no need to waste time in a strange place. Not only that, many people shouted, "DMN it, why aren't the lights on? Somebody turn on the lights. Where's my new phone? Who stole my new phone?" Nobody looked down on them for shouting like idiots. Most people were thinking the same thing. Luke, on the other hand, quietly disappeared into the darkness. The boogeyman's elementary concealment was perfect for night combat. Coupled with the nanosuit's shielding measures, Luke could avoid detection even by monitoring equipment. A hoarse and sharp voice rang out over the mall speakers. "Welcome to today's arcade." Many people raised their heads and looked around, but even more people were still clamoring and concerned about the new items they had bought. Amidst the noise, nobody noticed the metal roller shutters of the mall coming down. As for anyone who wanted to break in after that, they were driven away by some criminals wearing black hoods and rifles. After all, the people of Gotham were too familiar with rifles, even more with the effect of being shot by one. It wasn't a problem for two people to be pierced by the same bullet at this close a range. If hundreds of rifle bullets were fired, dozens of people would die. These weren't pistol bullets. Some victims of pistol bullets could still be saved. However, a person could be crippled by a rifle bullet, and if they weren't treated immediately, it would be fatal. Nobody in Gotham would come out on the streets tonight to give first aid. The people in the mall didn't know that they had become turtles in a cage, and continued making a fuss. Suddenly, multiple TV screens in the mall lit up. A thin and dour-looking middle-aged man in a green suit appeared. He smiled lightly. "Now, I'll announce the rules of the game. Whoever finds the trophies which I've placed inside this building within an hour can leave from here. The rest will be blown up along with this building." The noise died down quite a bit, but there were still a lot of people cursing this guy. The man in the green suit chuckled. "Next, I'll give you a riddle every minute. The answer is where a trophy is." More people quieted down, but it was still noisy. Only then did the man in the green suit lean in close to the screen, until his face was a little distorted. "Let me tell you a piece of good news. There are 200 trophies. You have a good chance of staying alive." Some of the calmer people subconsciously looked around. They felt that there were people everywhere on the first floor, and it didn't look like there were only 200 of them. In other words, it would be impossible for everyone to get a trophy. But there were very few people who could think rationally in this situation. Many of them simply snorted and continued to take what they were interested in. Leave. There were hallways everywhere in this mall. Just find one and get out. That was what most people thought. Suddenly, someone screamed, "The Riddler. He's the Riddler." It was a gut-wrenching scream, and the person sounded like he was about to collapse. At this shout, many people recalled the legend of a certain terrifying B*****, and their faces turned varying shades of color. On the TV screens, the man in the green suit smiled in satisfaction. "Congratulations, you got it right. You're slightly smarter than the other idiots. Unfortunately, this isn't a riddle, so you don't get a trophy." This time, almost nobody cursed him. Instead, more people whispered to each other and asked about the Riddler. When they heard the horror stories that had grown bigger with every retelling, and after many people around them confirmed that the Riddler was a supervillain, almost everyone was terrified. Few looters here were ruthless and bloodthirsty. Most of them were ordinary citizens. They were naturally terrified of the supervillains of Gotham. Even if they had never been tortured by supervillains while growing up in Gotham, they definitely knew family and friends who had. Even if only a small number of people had been killed by the Riddler, supervillains never took human lives seriously. If he said that the mall would blow up later, it would. Many people didn't even bother to guess the D*MN riddle as they simply ran to various exits. Then, gunshots rang out at the entrance. Several young men who had tried to destroy the metal roller shutters collapsed in front of them. The Riddler smiled. Sorry, anyone who disrupts the guessing game automatically loses the qualification to play, so there's no need for them to live. Oh, by the way, if the building exits are forcibly destroyed, the explosion will be automatically triggered. So, watch the people around you. Don't let them blow up everyone beforehand. Everybody looked at each other, and some of the more cowardly ones started to cry. No, I don't want to die yet. Mom, I want to go home. DMN it, I haven't played with my new game console yet. How can I die here? Just like that, the game stumbled back onto the right track. Unknown to everyone, however, an invisible figure moved quietly through the building and destroyed the bombs that were scattered around. The bombs still looked the same on the surface. Even the time was still ticking down normally, but the explosive materials inside had been replaced with mud. Luke's ability to store and release items in his inventory was a cheat. He could switch items remotely without leaving any traces. The cleanup only took 5 minutes. At that moment, the Riddler was repeating the riddle for the third time. It only takes a moment to form, but it can last forever. It can bring the dead back to life, and it can make your eyes water. The person who got the answer was the man in the Spider-Man mask, Cold. When he thought of the answer, he cried out, I got it. Then, he saw a bunch of people turn around and glare at him. Looking at the rods, steel pipes, knives, chargers and other lethal weapons that these people were holding, he hurriedly gave the answer. It's a memory, a memory. 2222 Side story, Fantasy Journey 63. A bunch of lousy students were at a loss. If they could study hard, would they be looting things here? They could only continue glaring at the genius, Cold. So, where the hell is the D*MN trophy? Cold had a long face. He had blurted out the answer in excitement. How was he supposed to know what location it was referring to? But seeing the weapons around him being raised higher and higher and getting closer and closer, a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. Memory card, find a place which sells memory cards. Those who used cell phones pretty much knew what that was. They turned around and ran to the phone store. Seeing that, the others followed. Looking at how the phone store was packed with what looked like a zombie horde, the nerds almost pissed their pants and didn't dare approach at all. Besides, they still had a bunch of wives on them. If they went over, wouldn't their wives be harassed by this bunch of smelly men? No way they would let that happen. Thankfully, most people were looking for the trophy, so nobody paid attention to them. They slipped to the side. Black Widow, Lazar glared at Spider-Man, Cold. You just want attention, is that it? If you guessed it, go look for it secretly yourself. Did you have to be so loud? Do you think you're surrounded by cheerleaders? That's right, you make fun of others cross-dressing every day, but you like to tie yourself up. You're a completely erotic version of Spider-Man. 4. Wicked hurriedly chimed in. Hesher, the Hulk, said, go get the trophy yourself. Isn't it good to get out alive? Cold opened his mouth, only to find that he had nothing to say. But he was just a nerd. How could he be that long-sighted when doing things? At that moment, the Riddler gave the second riddle. I can't be bought, but I can be easily stolen at a glance. I'm worthless to one person, but invaluable to two. What am I? Many people who couldn't squeeze into the store to look for the trophy heard it, but they still didn't know the answer, so someone shouted, where are those perverts? Come out and answer the question. The nerds were indignant. They curled up and stuck to the darker corners to hide. In any case, there was only the ghostly dark green light, and there was no one here at all. The Riddler actually didn't plan to let anyone go. He was only doing all this to savor a sense of superiority. He wouldn't give these people enough light to play by. There were a lot of people in the mall, and it was very chaotic. Few people remembered what the nerds looked like. They decisively retreated to the corners, and weren't discovered. Naturally, nobody answered the second question. The trophy for the first question was found, and a lot of people started fighting over it. Someone thought that it counted as soon as he got his hands on it, and he raised the trophy and shouted, "I got it. Let me out." As soon as he said that, his hand was empty. Reveling in his intelligence, the Riddler said, "Stupid people always work hard at things that won't succeed." He knew that it was impossible for the trophy to be redeemed, unless only one person was left here. While he was feeling smug, an angry roar rang out not far behind him. "You psycho, you only dare bully the poor. I'll kill you." Stunned for a moment, the Riddler turned his head and saw a boorish man charging over with a metal pipe raised high. That shabby jacket, plaid shirt, and jeans suggested that he was a laborer. The Riddler frowned. That shouldn't be. The defense line that someone as smart as him had set up was flawless. It was impossible for anyone to reach the top floor. Could it be that this person had climbed up somehow? Puzzled, he nevertheless calmly raised his walking stick. Judging from the person's movements, he didn't seem like anything special. As long as the Riddler used the small prop in his walking stick, he could subdue this brainless bottom-level idiot. But just as the Riddler raised his walking stick, the other party seemed too agitated, and swung the metal pipe at his head. The Riddler snorted unhappily and swung his walking stick. Bang! The metal pipe collided with the metal walking stick and then jumped strangely over the walking stick. Bang! The metal pipe that had been aimed at the Riddler's face jumped over his head and hit the back of his head hard. The Riddler's body swayed, and his vision turned dark. There seemed to be a lot of stars in the darkness. Then, his right hand felt light as his walking stick was snatched away. He heard a shout, "Riddler, get lost." With that, the new owner of the walking stick hit the Riddler hard in the right leg, and there was the sound of bones breaking. The Riddler's head cleared a little at the extreme pain. He screamed, "Be starred, who are you?" Swinging the walking stick, Luke fully sensed how sturdy and smooth this variation of a combat staff was, and didn't forget to spout nonsense. "Your stupid riddles disgust me. Do you know how pigs die?" The Riddler screamed, but he still couldn't help but wonder. Luke broke the Riddler's left leg with the cane. "You died of stupidity, idiot." "Riddler," Luke asked, "do you know how I got here?" The Riddler couldn't help but wonder again. Luke raised the walking stick again and broke the Riddler's right hand. "I walked up here, idiot." The Riddler screamed, "You're lying. That isn't a riddle at all." Luke thought for a moment before he raised his walking stick. "You still don't admit that you're stupid. I'm going to beat you up today." Crack! The Riddler's left hand was also broken. In the hall on the first floor, the noisy crowd that had been fighting for the trophy had already quieted down. They turned around and looked at the miracle on the surveillance feed in shock. What happened to being a supervillain? What happened to being extremely ruthless? What happened to controlling everything? At that moment, there was a lot of light in the building, and many people noticed that the metal roller shutters at the entrance were going up. The criminals outside the door had collapsed and didn't move where they lay on the ground. Some people near the door completely forgot about the people who had been shot earlier and ran out. When the others saw that, they immediately followed. No matter what the situation was like, it was better to leave with everyone first. That was what most people thought. After almost everyone left, the nerds finally snuck out of hiding. Suddenly, Black Widow, Lasser's phone rang, scaring everyone. He hurriedly took out his phone and picked up the call. Lasser asked in a low voice, "Shower, why are you calling me?" Shower was impatient. "Sissy, where are my husbands? Why haven't you brought them back after so long?" Lasser said with a pained expression, "We were stuck in a mall and haven't left yet." "You could have called your brother. Why call me?" 2223 Side Story, Fantasy Journey 64. Shower's voice turned into a roar. "You mean Fisher? That B** isn't picking up my calls." Lasser turned around and decisively handed the phone to a comrade dressed in a fish suit. "She's your sister, you take care of it." In this fish suit, this nerd was probably cosplaying a fat blowfish. After all, his stomach was the most prominent feature, which fully filled up the slightly reflective fish suit. Fat blowfish. Fisher took the phone with a frown. "Hey, my phone dropped earlier." At that point, he suddenly came back to himself and said to his fellows in a low voice, "Hey, help me look." Iron Man. Summer looked at him like he was an idiot. "There are new ones at the phone counter. Do we still need to look for your broken phone?" As soon as he said that, everybody who was walking out paused. That was right, Everyone else had already run. It wasn't a big deal to take a detour to the phone counter to get some things before they left, right? Fisher wanted to go too, but Shower asked on the other end of the line, "Did you get my husband's? I want more of my first husband Batman, I don't need as many of my second husband Iron Man." Fisher wanted to cry. What did it feel like to have a sister who shared the same hobby? It definitely wasn't heaven. That was because she would squeeze time and money out of the nerds, directly or indirectly reducing the number of wives they could get. Tonight, for example, half of Fisher's loot had to be set aside for Shower's husbands, Batman and Iron Man. DMN it. Why does my sister not only like each husband, she also likes to turn them into a couple? A certain fat blowfish roared in his heart. The nerds quickly entered the phone store, which now looked like a dumpster, and started searching for possible new phones. Black Widow. Lazar picked up a very small metal trophy and was speechless. This was the Riddler's trophy that hundreds of people had fought over earlier, but it had now been abandoned in the phone store. There were dozens of unlucky B** stards who were bleeding on the floor. Some of them had been beaten up when the fight broke out, and some had been knocked down and trampled on. Thankfully, they weren't in critical condition. A few of them who weren't seriously injured even looked around as soon as they got up, hoping to get back some medical expenses. Lazar couldn't help but feel a little sad. Why come out looting? Isn't it good to stay home and crossdress? As he spoke, a shadow jumped down from upstairs and landed in front of him with a dull bang. Lazar didn't react at all. Luke turned around and looked at the guy. He suddenly smiled. "I think you're very smart, young man." As he spoke, he grabbed Lazar's transparent backpack, which had the Black Widow figurines in them. Just as Lazar was about to fight back, he suddenly felt that this person looked familiar. When he saw the familiar walking stick in Luke's other hand, he froze and started to tremble. You, Luke tapped his shoulder with the walking stick. "Young man, crossdress if you want, but don't go running out in Black Widow cosplay in the future. That's asking for a beating. No thanks to your blinding appearance," he added inwardly as he strode out of the mall. Stunned for a few seconds, Lazar then came back to himself and rubbed his shoulder. "Ouch, that hurts." To punish this crossdresser for tainting his eyes, Luke had specifically hit the bone. But even worse was to come. My wife. OMG, that D**MN guy stole my wives. A bruised heart naturally lasted longer than a bruised bone. Seeing this, fat blowfish, Fisher, who was still being nagged at by Shower, couldn't help but feel happy. It was a good thing he didn't like crossdressing, or he wouldn't even be able to keep half of what he had of his wife. The others had the same thought. They simply sped up their search. This world was becoming more and more depraved. Someone actually dared to steal their wives. They should hurry home and put their wives away. Only Lazar, with tears in his eyes, silently rubbed his face on the Black Widow bolster that had been under his arm. "You're the only one I have now. Don't worry, I'll definitely treat you well." On the other side, Master Wayne, Victor and Barry were already putting out fires. Superman still couldn't come. After the fire and the chemical explosion, all sorts of dangerous situations were happening everywhere in Metropolis. Batman told Superman not to worry about Gotham. This was definitely one of the Joker's plans. If Superman really had nothing to do, these supervillains in Gotham would all be killed in less than half an hour. After all, no matter how strong they were, they couldn't withstand a punch from Superman. The best way to deal with Superman was to keep him busy saving people. This was supposed to be a game which the Joker had created for Master Wayne, but the latter didn't fall for it, and had simply knocked him out. There would still be chaos in both cities, but the Joker didn't get the chance to play even if he wanted to. It was only Master Wayne and his teammates who went on a killing spree. With Master Wayne taking the lead, Victor providing support, and Barry filling in the gaps, several supervillains were knocked out before they had time to counterattack. Master Wayne didn't even need to bother with them. Barry just threw the unconscious supervillains onto a cargo plane controlled by Victor. The entire process was like an assembly line, and no time was wasted. But after keeping busy for a while, Master Wayne suddenly felt that something wasn't right. Almost all the people he caught didn't have enough brains or were openly flaunting themselves, like Two-Face, Professor Pig, Poison Ivy and Grundy. As for the other cunning guys like Bane, the Penguin, the Mad Hatter and the Riddler, none of them appeared. Could it be that they were already working together behind the scenes to do something big? Master Wayne's heart jumped, and he became more vigilant. After receiving the notification, the butler immediately increased his efforts to look for these important targets. In an underground tunnel where they couldn't see, Bane, who was as strong as a mountain, was panting and half kneeling on the ground. This stretch of tunnel was littered with his men. "Who are you?" Gritting his teeth, he struggled to prop himself up as he stared at the black figure in front of him. Although this person was much smaller than Master Wayne, Bane already had the impression that he couldn't stand up to him. Useless. Everything was useless. Whether it was strength, speed, skills, or support gear, he was crushed in all aspects. The other party was calm and unhurried as he punched and kicked him until he fell to his knees. He also took care of a dozen of Bane's elite men. This was worse than being defeated by some trump card or weapon. The other party didn't need to use his full strength in order to suppress Bane. Now, Bane's competitive spirit made him ask the question. That was because he didn't believe that this was Batman. Batman wasn't that strong at all. At the very least, he hadn't reached the point where he could best Bane in hand-to-hand combat. Luke was surprised. "You don't know me." 2224 Side Story. Fantasy Journey 65. He had thought that the Joker would at least give these supervillains a warning before letting them out, for example, that the Dark Knight wasn't to be trifled with. It seemed that Luke had overestimated how much the Joker valued Knight. Maybe he had underestimated the Joker's true love for Master Wayne. Knowing that, Luke wasn't interested in talking to Bane. He simply stepped forward and punched him hard. Bane's vision turned dark, and he completely lost consciousness as he was thrown into Space 2. They could have a long chat in Space 2 in the future. Luke also threw Bane's subordinates into another isolated space to keep them as test subjects for the time being. It wasn't that Luke was black-hearted, but that these guys were all so red they were almost black in the system. More than 100 ordinary people had been seriously injured by Bane and his men tonight, and more than 20 people had died on the spot. Coupled with the chaos tonight, there was at least a 50% chance that the heavily injured would die. For a murder gang like this, which had killed more than 4 people per member tonight, killing them right away would simply be letting their dead victims down. The group of evil scientists locked up in Space 2 back home hadn't been brought over with Luke, but he had recently collected a lot of evil scientists in this DC universe. He also had Ultima 2, and while it wasn't possible to develop high-level research projects, it wasn't a problem to collect some experimental data for future research. Including the Riddler and the Penguin, whom Luke had caught at the very beginning, there were already 3 supervillains in Space 2, as well as hundreds of their men as test subjects. The Joker's big plan tonight was strongly supported by the Penguin. The Penguin wasn't directly involved in tonight's operation, but he acted as an intermediary for a large number of professional criminals to help the Joker and other villains who had escaped from Arkham. His goal was very simple: let Gotham return to darkness and chaos. After all, the brighter Gotham was, the less suitable it was for criminals to survive. After the Dark Knight appeared, Gotham's underground forces slowly declined. The Penguin wasn't an idiot. Rather than feel happy about the territories that had become available after his compatriots went missing, he felt a huge crisis. At this rate, he would soon become Gotham's most eye-catching boss. Even if Batman didn't kill him, he would become a one-man show after losing his key underlings. The Penguin wasn't a pure lunatic like the Joker, but a shady businessman. His goal was to obtain wealth and power. He wasn't interested in being like the Joker, who could casually sway some cannon fodder into doing things. He preferred experienced underlings who were professional, obedient and handy. So, the Penguin contacted the Joker, and they split the work. It had also been the Penguin's idea to use the upper class as hostages, which could create even more unrest in Gotham. It would take at least a year or 2 for law and order to return to its previous state. This period of time was enough for the Penguin to consider the pros and cons, to decide whether to retreat or advance forward, and to arrange an escape route. Now, all his plans had come to nothing, because Luke had targeted him at the very beginning. Luke didn't touch the Penguin, purely because the guy was in Arkham. Destroying Master Wayne's doll cabinet would easily cause conflict. But since Arkham's supervillains relied on their own intelligence and diligence to escape, too bad for Master Wayne. After catching Bane, Luke quickly headed for his next target. Soon, a thin bald man appeared in front of him. The thin man led a group of criminals in black masks as they herded people into buildings everywhere. Not long after the criminal group left, all sorts of timed explosives inside caused huge fires. This had the effect of holding up Master Wayne's plane, which had no choice but to spray the fires with liquid nitrogen to stop them from spreading. Victor and the butler, who were operating the plane, were hence kept a little busy. They could only leave Master Wayne and Barry to complete more missions on their own. This thin Baldy was the capable subordinate of the Penguin Zaz. His bald head was usually more conspicuous, but it was hard to notice him in a crowd. However, Luke didn't need to use his eyes or drones to lock onto Zaz's location. As the crowd was herded into another building, the criminals in black masks at the front were suddenly sent flying, and the crowd was swept back in two directions, as if they had been hit with a bouncy ball. In the crowd, Zaz stopped and slowly raised his head to stare at a figure 10 meters away. He was wearing a shabby denim jacket, a plaid shirt and jeans. He had messy hair and stubble, and was holding a metal pipe that was half a meter long. Of course, it was Luke, the enthusiastic citizen who had transformed into a laborer to beat up people. Zaz glanced at the metal pipe with extreme skepticism. Someone would actually use an ordinary metal pipe against him. The two parties stared at each other for a few seconds without taking action. Luke didn't want to fight in the crowd, while Zaz didn't want the crowd to provide Luke with cover. They had different intentions, but they made the same choice. It wasn't until the crowd around Luke retreated that the criminals in black masks aimed their guns. The moment they raised their guns, Luke was already running. Violent gangs, get lost. The criminals had expected him to run, but his speed was completely unexpected. Luke's movements seemed very clear, yet the guns couldn't lock onto him. He actually covered 10 meters in less than half a second. The metal pipe smashed down fiercely. Zaz felt that something wasn't right. In his eyes, Luke's movements were very coordinated, but he wasn't fast or strong enough. With a flick of his hands, two daggers appeared. He bent low and slashed at Luke's abdomen. Then, dwang. When they brushed past each other, Zaz staggered several steps before he regained his balance. He instantly turned around, but didn't see Luke. He had been inexplicably hit in the head, and his mind was in a mess. He couldn't help but shake his bald head. Who was he? Where was he? What happened just now? Unfortunately, the only people that would tell him the truth, the criminals in black masks, were already facing the same crisis. The metal pipe in Luke's hand instantly sped up, and he lashed out at the center of Zaz's head, leaving a red mark. As expected, it turned into a purple-black eye, 5 centimeters wide. Then, Luke charged into the group of criminals behind Zaz. The confrontation just now had caused the scattered criminals to converge in a semicircle 10 meters in diameter. Luke had killed more than 1,000 hitmen, mercenaries, and armed men in this sort of formation. All he needed to do was kill his way from one side to the other. It was as easy as playing a Pac-Man game. 2225 Side story. Fantasy Journey 66. In the eyes of the crowd, something fantastic happened once more. The laborer brandished this common weapon of the masses and charged valiantly at the group of masked men with guns. Bang, bang. The onlookers, who were holding their breaths, clearly heard two crisp sounds. Two criminals on the right had barely raised their guns when they were hit in the forehead by the half-meter-long metal pipe. They collapsed without a sound. The other criminals couldn't help but move their guns to the right and start shooting. The bullets fired missed Luke. Bang, 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 bang. At that moment, this soldier of the people who was holding a metal pipe was like the protagonist in a Hong Kong martial arts movie who charged into a group of enemies. He swung left and right, and 4 more criminals were knocked out. The criminals on the right had no choice but to swing the guns round from the front to the back. Luke's fighting style, however, suddenly changed. He punched and kicked 4 people nearby, causing them to stagger back into the midst of their comrades. Their movements blocked their comrades' line of fire. Luke's quick brain ensured that no gun could be aimed at him. At that moment, the semicircle of criminals unknowingly shrunk to an irregular oval, and Luke was cutting into the center of the oval. Then, this 1v9 battle circle was filled with screams right away. The fierce swings of Luke's metal pipe turned into quick jabs, flicks and lifts. At the same time, he always made sure to keep moving 4 shields around him to block his body. To the remaining 5 criminals, it felt like there was always a comrade on the other end of their guns. Whether it was because they were worried about injuring their comrade or they had yet to lock onto their target, there was hesitation in their movements. 2 of them overreacted and pulled the triggers, successfully opening a few holes in 2 shields, but the other 3 didn't have time to follow suit. The unremarkable-looking gray metal pipe shot out from behind the force shields like a viper and hit the hands that were holding the trigger. There were cracks, and the criminals' palms were bent out of shape. That was nothing. The fingers of the two men who had pulled the triggers were also broken, and they were sent flying several meters. But before they could even scream, the gray metal pipe fell on them again. This time, it was on their heads. As they fell, Luke stopped controlling the force shields, and let them fall limply. While the metal pipe was taking care of the 5 armed criminals, Luke punched the heads of the force shields and knocked them out. It took less than 10 seconds for 15 armed criminals to fall. Zaz finally felt less dizzy from being hit in the head, but it started to hurt. The feeling of something twitching in his head and wanting to come out was extremely uncomfortable. Even if the criminals who had helped him were all wiped out in front of him, he had to calm down, or he wouldn't be any slower than the criminals to fall. So, he said, "Wait, we can talk." Luke glanced at Zaz. "About what?" As he spoke, he stabbed down with the metal pipe and destroyed the firearms on the ground. Zaz asked, "Who are you?" Luke said, "Me, I'm just an ordinary laborer. Then I can hire you for $100,000 to work for me tonight. How does that sound?" Luke threw a broken rifle at Zaz's face. "This gun alone can be sold for more than $300,000 on Gotham's black market." Zaz raised his hand to block the gun. $500,000. After destroying the guns, Luke sneered. "I'm a laborer. I hate it when people throw money at me." Saying that, he raised the metal pipe at Zaz again. Still, Zaz didn't give up. He shouted, "I know where the Joker's giant bomb is. That's 1 ton of TNT. A lot of people will die." In fact, as a capable underling of the Penguin, he knew that the Joker had at least dozens of tons of explosives. Losing 1 ton was nothing. He was just trying to distract this person, whom he suspected was a superhero. This sort of person worried about civilian lives the most. The gray metal pipe, however, didn't stop, and Zaz's blades suddenly sped up, as if he hadn't been injured at all. He was far stronger than an ordinary person. Although Luke's metal pipe was heavy, it hadn't dealt a serious injury. Zaz had only been buying time for his dizziness to fade so that he could counterattack. After all, Luke's combat movements were as smooth as flowing water. Even Zaz himself didn't dare say that he was stronger. However, Zaz felt that he could rely on his physique to catch the other party off guard. A knife could deal a heavier injury than a metal pipe. So, he aimed one knife at the metal pipe and the other at Luke's chest. As long as he hit his target, Zaz would take advantage of the opportunity to cut open his stomach. Unfortunately, dreams were always beautiful. In reality, Luke's metal pipe suddenly withdrew a little to avoid Zaz's daggers. Then, it turned from a swing to a stab to his forehead. Zaz's vision turned dark, and the familiar dizziness returned. Vaguely, he heard Luke sneer. "Idiot, my pipe is longer." In fact, it wasn't just his weapon that was 10 centimeters longer, so were his arms. From an onlooker's point of view, they could see that the metal pipe was already pressed to Zaz's head, but the daggers were still 20 centimeters away from Luke. After this successful attack, the metal pipe swung again and hit Zaz in the head a second time. Bang! The crisp sound of metal rang out, and Luke looked at Zaz in surprise. "Huh, your head is a little hard." Dwang, 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 dwang. Luke leaned in and hit Zaz's bald head with the steel pipe. If he really used his strength, he could smash Zaz's head open with the pipe, but this guy was definitely a good test subject. It would be a shame to kill him. Thus, Luke controlled his strength so that the hits made Zaz dizzy but didn't damage his brain. The unlucky Zaz felt as if a bell was ringing in his head, and his consciousness grew more and more hazy. Finally, the world turned peaceful after being hit a dozen times. He passed out at last. At that moment, more than 20 red spots had appeared on his head, and some of them were already starting to bulge. Luke grabbed Zaz and looked around at the people who had started to whisper to each other. Some of them had just escaped the Riddler. It was really too bad for them to run into yet another situation. Seeing Luke look at them, they instantly shut up. 2226 Side Story. Fantasy Journey 67. Luke tapped the ground twice with the metal pipe and said, "Everybody, go home early today. Didn't you hear this guy say that they've put a ton of explosives in the mall? You'll die if you keep running around." Everybody looked at each other in bewilderment. A few seconds later, a middle-aged man who was dressed similar to Luke strode out and bowed deeply. "Thank you, sir. You saved me twice. How should I address you?" Luke waved the metal pipe. "I'm just an ordinary laborer." Stumped for a moment, the middle-aged man bowed again. My apologies, you do need to protect your identity. Thank you again, sir. With that, he strode out. He could only speak like this because Luke was dressed like him, which gave him a sense of familiarity. If it were Batman, the middle-aged man would be afraid of getting close and dirtying the big shot's armor. After being in life-threatening danger twice in a row, he didn't want to take any more risks, and what Luke had mentioned was even more dangerous. The man had heard of TNT before. He didn't know exactly how powerful a ton was, but it definitely wouldn't be just one building that blew up. Compared with this chaotic commercial district, the residential apartments were undoubtedly much safer. Few people in Gotham were complete idiots. Even those at the bottom had street smarts that had kept them alive until now. It was one thing for the law not to punish the masses, but it was very easy to be targeted as a large group by supervillains. This was a plot cliché, it was just that most people had never experienced it for themselves. Now, everyone here had experienced it for themselves, and twice, for many of them. With the middle-aged man taking the lead, and given what Luke had said, more and more people started to leave the building. Most of them went around Luke. After all, he had just used a pipe to knock out a dozen armed criminals. But some of the more emotional or thick-skinned guys ran over to thank him like a certain person from the group of nerds. Black Widow, Lazar was excited. Thank you for saving us. You saved us twice. We were really lucky. Luke glanced at him but didn't say anything. His friends weren't as bold. They were walking out, but could only stop and wait for him. A guy in a fish suit was clutching a half-naked figurine that was 40 centimeters tall as he murmured with tears on his face, "Honey, don't die." With Luke's eyesight, he could see a huge hole in the figurine from between the legs and all the way up to the top of the head. Your wife died a tragic death. Luke couldn't help but mock inwardly. Black Widow, Lazar, whose wife had been taken from him earlier on, had long scurried away the bolster behind him, for fear of losing this last bit of comfort. Still, he was excited. But I think you need a code name, to intimidate the enemy and promote yourself. Luke glanced at the metal pipe in his right hand and wondered if he should use it to shut this chatterbox up. In any case, these guys were technically thieves. They were all light red in color, and he wouldn't lose credit points even if they were beaten up. He had accumulated a lot of experience fighting thieves. Lazar suddenly felt a little threatened for some reason. Still, he was inspired. So, how about Crowbar Man? Luke slowly raised the steel pipe. Is this a crowbar? The sense of danger increased, and Lazar swallowed. Sorry, doesn't seem like it. Goodbye. He then ran off. But when he reached the entrance, he thought of a new name. I got it, you can be Stick Man. Not only that, he even urged his nerd companions to say, "Thank you, Stick Man." Luke, who had already walked into the darkness of the building, paused. He held himself back, and finally didn't throw out the stick in his hand to hit someone. How was that better than Crowbar Man? What Zaz didn't know was that Luke had been monitoring his group since the beginning. The drones had captured the entire process of the Penguin sending the explosives to the Joker and of the explosives being placed in various locations around the city. After Master Wayne knocked out the Joker, who was in charge of the overall situation, nobody knew how many explosives there were and when they would explode. The real danger was the bombs which the criminals carried on them. But Luke could take all the bombs back when he dealt with the criminals. Some innocent people might be caught up in the process, but not too many. Getting rid of these supervillains in one go in exchange for a bright future was a better choice. Luke wasn't a saint. It was impossible to eliminate evil without sacrifices. He wouldn't ask someone to sacrifice themselves, but he could only apologize to the people who got caught up in things. The best way to not make mistakes in the world was to not do anything. If you didn't do anything, the mistakes would be someone else's to make. Of course, Luke couldn't live his days as a slacker. The best he could do was minimize casualties of the innocent. He checked the time. His plane would arrive in an hour. He had to speed up. Throwing Zaz into space too, Luke disappeared into the darkness. On the first floor of a building, the Scarecrow was leaning against a pillar and urging impatiently, "Idiots, hurry and move the canisters in. If we're any later, we won't have anything to do tonight." The criminals in pig masks simply looked at each other and didn't say anything, but they did pick up their pace. They knew before the mission tonight that they were just helping out a bunch of lunatics. As long as their own lives weren't threatened, the lunatics could do whatever they wanted. Tomorrow, after the intermediary confirmed that they hadn't slacked off, the remaining 50% of their reward would be transferred to their secret accounts. So, for the sake of money, these lunatics could be the boss, and the criminals just needed to do their job. Despite his pushing, the Scarecrow wasn't in a hurry. It had been less than an hour since the show started. Furthermore, those idiots only knew how to use their fists and feet or guns to do things. The truth was that less than 10% of people were involved in the current chaos, which was too inefficient. Only a genius like him could think to use this tall building in the city center to launch his fear toxin in densely populated areas throughout the city. At that time, whether it was the blue-collar, white-collar or middle-class people at the bottom, they would all FC King get high. Thinking that, the Scarecrow couldn't help but laugh under his strange scarecrow mask, which had a crooked and terrifying smile on it. The only problem with the plan was the danger of transporting the toxic gas. In order to ensure that the Joker would get him out of Arkham, the Scarecrow hadn't been able to make any preparations in advance, and the fear toxin was stored in secret locations. After the chaos started, and it was confirmed that neither Superman nor Batman had the energy to pay attention to him, the canisters of toxic gas were brought over. What he needed to do now was install the canister launchers which the criminals had brought with them and detonate the canisters in the air 200 to 300 meters away. At that time, the toxic gas would spread to cover the residential areas below. 2227 Side Story, Fantasy Journey 68. While imagining the big scene, the Scarecrow suddenly felt that the building was a little quiet. 20 or so criminals moving canisters and launchers made a lot of noise, and they had to coordinate with each other via walkie-talkie every now and then. Now, it was too quiet. The Scarecrow suddenly raised his head and looked at the transparent elevator in the middle of the wide floor of the building. This wide space and the elevator were also important reasons why he had chosen this building, since it would be easy to see how the criminals were doing. At that moment, the transparent elevator reached the 16th floor and stopped. 6 criminals were still waiting on the first floor, as if they hadn't noticed anything unusual. The Scarecrow was furious. Something's wrong. Ask the people upstairs what's going on. Sensing that something was wrong, the 6 criminals raised their guns and looked around warily. Several shadows came spinning downward without a sound. They stabbed the 6 criminals in the neck. The 6 criminals immediately froze and then toppled over unconscious. The Scarecrow secretly opened a vial of fear liquid and let it evaporate around him. "Come out, mystery man. Maybe we can have a chat." A figure jumped over the railing on the 16th floor and dropped quickly. When he was about to land, the cape on his back unfurled to offset most of his speed. Bang! With a dull thud, the man was standing less than 2 meters away from the Scarecrow. The Scarecrow didn't retreat. He simply asked in a surprised tone, "Batman?" Although there was a difference in appearance, the glide and landing was completely in line with Batman's style. Luke shook his head indifferently. "Sorry, wrong answer." Bang! Scarecrow. Unfortunately, his head wasn't as sturdy as Zaz's, and he could only pass out with a belly full of questions and indignation. It wouldn't have been long before the fear gas took effect, and he would have been able to turn the tables. Luke, whose suit completely blocked out the air outside, naturally didn't care about this nerve gas. But he was in a hurry. He didn't have time to let the Scarecrow deliver his parting words. Besides, there was no audience here, and there was no need for Crowbar Man to make an appearance. Knock the guy down, toss him into the space, and he was done. Why take down the Scarecrow? Because this guy was behind a lot of major cases that targeted a large number of civilians, he would definitely be one of the best in terms of how much experience and credit points he was worth. Secondly, Luke could study the fear gas. After retching, farting, itching, cramping and other non-lethal types of gear, it wasn't bad to develop a new fear accessory for Selina to have fun beating people up with. After the nerds fled the building, they didn't waste any more time and quickly headed home. They lived in the same apartment block, which was why they went back together. There were a lot of people on the road. Some had excited expressions. They had probably just come out to start looting. Some were clutching various things and had a wary air as they headed home. People like these, especially the unlucky ones who were on their own, were often robbed of their gains, and could only look for new goods later. As they walked, the nerds were on edge. Who the hell knew if there was some pervert who insisted on stealing their wives? Thankfully, they were in a group, and the things they had were unremarkable. Most of the people who were robbed had bigger and more expensive electronic products or branded sneakers. The figurines that the nerds had weren't cheap either. The problem was that most people didn't have the ability to differentiate between ordinary dolls and figurines. Nobody could tell in Gotham's poor street lighting. Just like that, they walked a kilometer on tenterhooks. Just as they were about to leave the commercial district, there was a sudden rumble, and a huge figure popped out of a sewer not far away. A large amount of sewage, mud and broken pavement sprayed into the air. In the dim light, the huge figure roared. Its body was thick and bloated, and completely out of proportion. It was like a mudman that had been tossed out randomly. The next moment, it suddenly paused. Then, with a whoosh, it returned underground, its roar quickly dying out. The nerds who had witnessed this scene from 10 meters away felt a chill run down their spines. Why did it feel like this small monster had been dragged back down as prey of an even bigger monster? Stunned for a few seconds, Black Widow, Lazar suddenly exclaimed, "Ah, FCK. What's this? It stinks and it's disgusting." Everybody finally came back to their senses. They looked at each other and then at themselves. Suddenly, they screamed in unison. "Ah, wife, my wife." When the small monster burst out just now, it had sent a lot of sewage, mud and dirt flying at least 10 meters into the air and scattering in all directions. The nerds were in this range. While they didn't get much on them, they were still covered around 30 to 50%. No thanks to Gotham's poor council efforts and the level of pollution, the sewage sludge here could completely be classified as a biological weapon. Not only was everybody's faces in the group covered, their bags, which contained their figurines, were also covered in gross black stuff. In the sewers, Luke had just knocked out the mud monster and stuffed him into space too. Hearing the blood-curdling screams, he checked the drone feed before he relaxed. In any case, they hadn't swallowed anything, they had just been splashed with a little sewage mix. It was just a little disgusting, and there was no possibility of them being poisoned. He didn't think anyone would be stupid enough to swallow that. Wait. They were screaming like pigs being slaughtered. Who knew, maybe they really did swallow it. The thought flashed through Luke's mind before he tossed the matter to the back of his head. He was just a passerby, there was no need for him to gloat. The screaming nerds couldn't do anything at all. After a while, they automatically stopped and examined their wives for contamination. The good news was that most of the mud had been blocked by the high-end camping bags which they had bought for $0, while the bad news was that a small portion had seeped through the zips. The bigger problem was that it was too smelly. They definitely couldn't play with their wives when they smelled like that. The most wretched person was still Black Widow, Lazar. He only had a bolster left, which he had stuffed inside his jacket, but the bottom half still got black. The others had no time to care about his wretched state. Lazar could only stubbornly comfort himself. "It's fine, honey. Let's go back and use a high-level cleaning agent to get you clean." After this incident, the biggest benefit was that they no longer had to sneak back home. Everybody who approached them wrinkled their noses at first before they got a closer look at the black goo on them and instantly retreated. The nerds were like that old internet meme: as long as they turned into sh*t, nobody would dare step on them. 2228 Side Story. Fantasy Journey 69. Given the smell and appearance of the nerds, few people in all of Gotham would dare steal from them. Hence, the group returned to their neighborhood without a hitch, retching and complaining along the way as their hearts ached for their wives. But their homes would also stink for days if they went back like this. So, the nerds went straight to their usual activity venue, an old warehouse near the apartment block. They didn't live in an affluent area, and they had modified one corner of an old factory with shabby-looking metal on the outside, but which was actually a sturdy room inside. It was full of their wives and husbands which they had accumulated over the years. Only their latest favorite would go home to keep them company. However, given their financial situation, most of the figurines in the room were either secondhand or even recycled, or were imitations. The truly pure and flawless products were the ones they had looted tonight. Thus, even though they had encountered two life-threatening calamities, tonight, they weren't willing to give up their gains and run off. The abandoned factory had water, electricity, and beds, which had all been secretly brought over by the nerds over the years. It didn't have a lot of appliances, but the group could eat, drink, take a dump and sleep here. After receiving a message, Fat Blowfish, Fisher's sister, Shower, arrived early with a lot of cleaning supplies. But when the splattered group came in, she staggered back as if she had gotten an electric shock. "Wow, where did you go? Did you fall into a cesspit?" Suddenly, she thought of a terrifying possibility and screamed, "Is the toy store you're talking about a public toilet?" "I don't want it." Fisher smiled bitterly. "All right, we were tortured by those supervillains to this point, let us clean off this sh*t-like thing first, okay?" Shower was skeptical. "Are you sure it's not really sh*t? True, it stinks a lot more than sh*t. Summer said, "Shower, we need to shower first." Looking at the smelly nerds approaching her, the only female member in the group could only run away. It couldn't be helped. The closer they got, the harder it was for her to breathe. This was a proper swarm of biological weapons. Then, noisy and chaotic voices rang out in the factory. "Shower, where's the shampoo? This isn't even enough for just me. Shower, where's the shower gel? There are only 2 bottles. It's not enough. Where's the laundry powder? Why is there only 1 bag? Only half a bottle of cleaning fluid. Then whose wife should use it first? Why isn't the water hot? Is the water heater broken? B-starred, you're stepping on my wife's foot. Honey, don't die." After a long period of chaos, the nerds finally finished the basic cleanup. As for the results, just look at how Shower, who was hiding 10 meters away, was still wearing a face mask. The nerds also threw the clothes they had taken off into a trash can outside the factory and cleaned up the filth they had tracked inside with water. Otherwise, Shower wouldn't be hiding 10 meters away, but would have gone straight home instead. This was enough for now, because they still needed to clean the figurines they had brought back. However clean the group was now, they were about to get a little dirty again. But for the sake of their wives and husbands, they could only endure it. Shower said that she had already done her job, bringing the cleaning supplies over. The cleanup would be left to them. The nerds all rolled their eyes, but they weren't unhappy. They all doted on this little sister. After all, it was hard for a penniless nerd to find a regular woman to talk to. With Shower around, there were plenty of nerds who wanted to join the FFF. They split up the work, and Lazar was assigned to open the bags and then throw them out. That was because he was the only one among them who didn't need to do any cleaning. After all, he had only brought back a bolster. As for Shower, she simply took one look at the Black Widow bolster before she said, "It's useless. Don't even think about trying to get this stain out. Hurry up and cut off the stained part, and turn it into a small bolster. If the stain spreads, your wife won't be able to keep her entire butt." With a long face, Lazar immediately did as he was told. After all, Shower was competent enough to be a professional tailor, and knew more about fabric than they did. The full-body bolster was cut into a half-body bolster, and Lazar's heart ached. Those long legs were gone. But he was also glad that he had protected his wife. He could still hold it in his arms. This outcome was just barely acceptable. It was better than nothing. That was what he said to himself, but Lazar's expression remained dejected. He had carried a backpack full of his many wives on his back. He didn't cherish her, and only regretted it when someone stole her. If God could give him another chance, he would definitely choose a non-transparent backpack. Except for Lazar, who was full of regret, everybody else gathered at a long table and sorted out the figurines that had been taken out of their bags. Each of them had several towels and cleaning fluid, and they cleaned up the filth to varying degrees. Shower was the luckiest. The husbands, which Fisher had brought back for her, basically weren't tainted, and were quickly handed over to her. The others weren't envious. Since Fisher had to carry items for both him and his sister, he naturally had fewer of his own compared with the other nerds. Even excluding the figurines that were too filthy to be saved, they still had more than Shower. The unpleasant smell couldn't stop these nerds, who had gotten what they wanted. They couldn't stop cheering. "OMG, this is a collector's edition that was released this year which supposedly can be posed in 18 different ways, she wasn't stained at all. Mine is a 30th anniversary edition, which is even rarer than yours. Hehe, yours are all trash. Look at my 2000 Millennium model. There are only 1,000 of them in the world." Shower was happily playing with her gains on the side, but she then saw Lazar, who had finished throwing out the trash, staring blankly at his half-body bolster. She couldn't bear it, so she called him over to have some coffee. She wouldn't drink any. It stank here, but these guys, who had stank all the way here, probably couldn't smell the stench anymore. After a tiring night, they drank to warm themselves up. "Tell me about your big adventure tonight." Shower picked something interesting to talk about. Lazar took a sip of his coffee to warm his cold heart. What's there to say? We were really unlucky to run into 3 supervillains in a row, Shower was astonished. You mean you were lucky? You actually came back intact despite your measly fight skills. 2229 Side story. Fantasy Journey 70. It wasn't that Shower was being cold-blooded, not many people in the city had truly run into supervillains tonight. She had called some acquaintances and asked around, and most of them had gained a lot, and gone home in high spirits. However, Fisher and the others returned later than many people, so she panicked a little and called them halfway to confirm what was going on. In fact, each villain basically only had 10 or 20 criminals to back them up. A small team of this size could only threaten 300 to 500 people. Any more, did they really think this was an army that followed orders? The people at the bottom in Gotham weren't stupid. Once they realized that the villains couldn't control the situation, they immediately scattered. They weren't stupid enough to stay as hostages. Besides, Luke, who was secretly capturing people like crazy, was swiftly reducing the amount of criminal activity. Hundreds of villains of all shapes and sizes poured out of Arkham, but only 10,000 to 20,000 people had been caught up in things. It was absolutely next to impossible for lucky nerds to run into supervillains 3 times in a row without getting hurt. Even though they reeked, they hadn't gotten a scratch from the supervillains. The only scratches were on their hands from their own carelessness when looting, which really couldn't be blamed on the villains. Lazar was lost for words at Shower's blunt statement. Thinking about what happened tonight, he could only nod and admit, "Fine, we really were lucky. Before tonight, I've never heard of anyone who is still alive after running into 3 supervillains in an hour." "We did it," Shower asked. "Who saved you?" "My first husband, Lazar. It would have been great to see Batman save us with our own eyes, but it really wasn't him who saved us tonight." "It was, Shower. Who was it? Was it the Dark Knight? You keep saying that he's Batman's lackey, but I actually think he's definitely very handsome." "Lazar. You've never seen his face, how can you be sure he's handsome? What if he looks like that thin Baldy?" Even as he grumbled inwardly, he still replied, "It was Stick Man who saved us." Shower frowned. "Stick Man, why does that sound like a villain's name?" "Lazar. He used a stick. He beat up the Riddler with a stick, and then beat up a fierce, bald, thin man. I helped him come up with this name." Shower was immediately enlightened. "I was wondering why the name was so tacky." Lazar was unconvinced. "He's a workman. Isn't that even more tacky?" Shower. "I don't believe you. You must be lying to me." Lazar raised his hand. "I swear on my wife's name that I'm not lying." Shower was unable to respond. Their wife's name was much more important to the nerds than their own honor. It seemed that he was telling the truth. Only then did Lazar tell her the details, especially about Luke's typical laborer outfit. In his narration, Luke's weapon turned into a crowbar, which proved his identity as a laborer. Stumped, Shower shook her head every now and then and mumbled, "That's impossible. That's too fantastic and unscientific." She couldn't accept that the hero who had stepped forward in a crisis to beat up villains and save a large number of commoners was actually a commoner himself. It was much harder to be a superhero in Gotham than to make a fortune. At the very least, a person didn't have to go all out all the time to make a fortune, while superheroes were a thorn in the side of supervillains. Batman was awesome, but he couldn't stop the simple and honest folk of Gotham from wanting to step up. Many people wanted to follow in his footsteps, but in the end, they died on the streets, and word spread of these people who had wanted to be heroes. The supervillains and their lackeys used this bloody reality as a way to tell everyone that heroes could feel good for one moment, but were cremated the next. Acting like a hero was risky. After decades, there were fewer and fewer people who dared to step out. Even though Batman became fiercer and fiercer, and had put enough villains in Arkham to form a military troop, he couldn't change the culture in Gotham. That was because Batman was a one-man show, while supervillains were pouring in from all over the country. There were more than 20 million people in the metropolitan areas around Gotham and Metropolis, which was about 5% of the population of this dark America. There were busy and stable trade routes between America and Europe here, so this region was an important transport hub. Only those who were a little more conspicuous or who were stupid fell into Batman's hands. In fact, there were even more underground forces in the areas around the 2 cities, but Master Wayne didn't bother with them. The outstanding members of these forces would naturally be drawn to the 2 richest cities. That was just the helpless reality. Batman's existence dealt a blow to evil, but at the same time, he cleaned up low-level gangs, leaving ample room for stronger gangs to expand. It was like Luke cracking down on illegal drugs and gangs back home, which were then replaced with all sorts of small but sophisticated organizations. They used the skyrocketing prices of goods to make huge profits from small sales. They even developed a guerrilla warfare strategy and carried out multiple transactions in vast remote areas to minimize losses, which impacted Ursa Minor's work efficiency. The criminals back home were getting more and more cunning, and harvesting points was becoming harder and harder. Although there were still a lot of idiots who delivered themselves on a platter, those who were really stupid wouldn't be big fish anyway. That was also one of the reasons why Luke had his clone come to the DC universe to establish a new farm for harvest. It had been a long time since Luke had enjoyed a supervillain sending himself to his door. Unfortunately, time waited for no man. He took 2 remote-controlled androids with him and quickly swept through the villains who weren't Master Wayne's targets. Space 2, which had always lacked heavyweight players, finally had the good stuff. Many had higher research value, like the man Luke was chasing. The guy was wearing a protective suit that was covered in tubes, and he was holding a huge freeze gun. Compared with trash like the Riddler, Mr. Freeze was the one with real IQ. At the very least, he knew how to use science and equipment. After Luke targeted him, the guy actually still relied on his flight gear to run for a while. But that was all. The man only flew a few kilometers out of Master Wayne's surveillance range when Luke shot him down. Dizzy from the fall, he got up and fired furiously. These shots were purely to vent his anger, because Mr. Freeze had no idea who had ambushed him. Seeing this, Luke threw a few non-lethal darts from a distance. Swoosh! A paralysis dart hit Mr. Freeze in the neck. He angrily pulled it out and threw it into the ground. He fired a few more shots in the direction he thought the darts were coming from. Swoosh! Z. Mr. Freeze twitched and then fell to the ground. Luke finally relaxed. It seems that ice men are still afraid of electricity. 2230 side story, Fantasy Journey 71 catching Mr. Freeze and throwing him into his space, Luke checked the consequences of the guy's fury. This was an industrial area, which was basically empty at night, and which was why he had chosen to catch Mr. Freeze here, but when he had gotten closer just now, he realized that there were people around, as if they had been drawn over by Mr. Freeze's hail of bullets. Luke saw a factory window that had been frozen and then shattered to reveal a big hole. Several people were hiding furtively near the entrance, stupefied and motionless. Luke scanned the factory and discovered that there were no casualties, only a small part of the factory had been frozen by Mr. Freeze's bullets. On the other hand, a person at the end of the road not far away had been frozen into an ice sculpture. It seemed that he had been hit as he was walking toward the factory entrance. Luke scanned him, shook his head, then left. This person had just been on TV tonight, and had been saved by Master Wayne not long ago. Now, he had inexplicably run into Mr. Freeze's line of fire. Furthermore, Mr. Freeze had used quick freeze to vent, and the person had died instantly. That was just how bad a person's luck could be sometimes. A moment ago, in the factory, Losser's phone suddenly rang, interrupting his conversation with Shower. After picking up the call and saying a few words, Losser was surprised. "Miss Aoi, you're not dead yet." "Ah, no, I'm not cursing you. Weren't you held hostage by those criminals?" "I saw it on TV. What, you escaped? You're almost at our safe house. We're here too." "Wait, you're not bringing the criminals here, are you?" His voice grew louder and louder, and the nerds who were obsessed with their new wives all turned their attention to him. Losser hung up, stood up, and took 2 steps before he hesitated. He then walked to a corner and took out a homemade crossbow. Looking at the stunned people on the side, Losser frowned. "I'm worried that this guy is lying. He was with hundreds of criminals. If even just a few of them followed him, we're in danger." Everybody subconsciously looked at their wives on the long table. They ran to a few corners and took out their hidden self-defense weapons. As cosplay fans, it was normal for them to make some bows. These things were too heavy and inconvenient to use, but they could still be useful in an emergency. After they were all equipped, Losser told Shower to close the back door and pay attention so that nobody snuck in from there. If a criminal broke in through the front entrance, Shower could slip out through the back door and get help. After making arrangements for their darlings, the nerds then gathered together and approached the entrance with various self-defense weapons. The reason they didn't turn Miss Aoi away was because nerds weren't that black-hearted. After all, Miss Aoi was a feminine, friendly person. Compared with Lazar's third-rate cosplay, which had made Luke want to beat him up, Miss Aoi was definitely a big shot in cross-dressing. It was hard to tell he was a guy without taking off his clothes. Also, Miss Aoi had a pretty good job, corporate spy. He gave the nerds some benefits every now and then, which was why the nerds, begrudgingly, acknowledged him. After they left the factory and locked the door, they hid behind a bunch of broken machines on the side to watch the road. Not long after, Miss Aoi turned out of an alley not far from the factory and looked behind him warily. Of course, he was no longer dressed as a woman. Given how beautiful he was in women's clothes, he would definitely have been ravished if he appeared on the streets of Gotham tonight looking like that. Lazar quickly confirmed the other party's identity. He was about to step forward to greet him, when there was a sudden sound in the sky. A figure glowing with a bluish-white light fell from 10 meters in the air. After rolling twice on the ground, he shouted angrily, "Come out, come out." Then, he jumped more than 10 meters high and fired randomly in all directions. Miss Aoi, who was very vigilant, had already ducked to the side, but there wasn't even a warning sign for him to take cover behind. Miss Aoi ran to a corner of a roadside building. At that moment, white smoke dropped from the sky and landed in front of him. Miss Aoi only had time to curse, "FCK," before he crashed into the thick white smoke and fell silent. Lazar, who had just raised his foot, was dumbfounded. The nerds who were secretly observing were also dumbfounded. What kind of luck was this? He had been dodging here and there, but happened to run into a random shot by Mr. Freeze. Mr. Freeze casually fired a few times and didn't even look at Miss Aoi. Trash who could be killed with one shot definitely wasn't the enemy who was chasing him. Then, Luke rushed over, knocked Mr. Freeze down, and dragged him away. The area around the factory fell silent. A few minutes later, after making sure that everything was peaceful, Lazar carefully walked out of his hiding spot and went over to Mr. Aoi. Looking at the conflicted, depressed, and aggrieved expression on his face, Lazar tentatively patted Miss Aoi's shoulder. "Are you all right?" Crack. A crack suddenly appeared in Miss Aoi's shoulder. Crack, crack, crack. There was a concentrated crack, which spread throughout Miss Aoi's body. In the end, he completely shattered and turned into tiny pieces. Lazar was dumbfounded. The nerds behind him sucked in sharp breaths. Fat blowfish. Fisher even stuffed his hand into his mouth to stop himself from screaming. "For," Wicked murmured, "FCK. Lazar actually killed his teacher." Iron Man. Summer calmed down a little. I'm pretty sure Miss Aoi was killed by that white smoke." A moment later, the others dragged the dazed Lazar back to the factory. After all, it was too dangerous outside tonight. Miss Aoi, this old acquaintance, would no longer cross-dress and be eye candy for them anymore. There was even less fun in life now. After they returned to the factory and locked the door, they finally relaxed and heaved sighs of relief. Turning around, everybody looked at their wives. Then, there was wailing inside the factory, which was even more sorrowful than when Miss Aoi died. "FCK, my wife. FCK, my collector's item wife. FCK, my 30th anniversary edition wife." The long table full of their wives in the factory was covered in a layer of blue and white transparent crystals, just like Miss Aoi had been. 4. Wicked was the first to come back to his senses. He finally shouted, "Stop. Stop shouting. Maybe our wives can still be saved." Hearing that, everybody immediately shut up. The nerds trembled as they approached the long table. None of them dared to get close. Miss Aoi had been shattered by Lazar earlier. However, the items, including the long table, just looked like they were covered in a layer of transparent blue crystals, which felt a little like they had been sealed in plastic. "What are you doing?" Shower's puzzled voice suddenly rang out. Everybody who was observing the situation jolted, and Fisher couldn't help but cry out. Their hearts tightened, but there was no reaction from the frozen table. Everybody heaved sighs of relief. Crash, bang. The sunroof finally couldn't take it anymore. The frozen glass shattered and the metal window frame broke and fell to the floor. 2231 Side Story, Fantasy Journey 72 Crack. There was the faint but terrifying sound of a crack. The nerds looked away from the sunroof and turned around, only to see familiar cracks on the long table. Crack, crack, crack. The chain reaction started and ended in less than 5 seconds. The long table and the numerous figurines and mementos on it turned into dregs and collapsed into a huge pile of powder. The nerds, only Shower and Lazar silently retreated to the side. Shower's husbands and the Black Widow bolster were 10 meters away, where they had been chatting, so they were lucky enough to avoid this disaster. First, Lazar had lost his wives, then he had lost the legs on his wife bolster. Then, he lost his good girl friend. Lazar hugged the half-bolster tightly. At the very least, I still have you. It was wrong to build your happiness on someone else's pain, but knowing that someone else was in even more pain than you could be considered a reverse healing. Seeing his comrades, who had been in high spirits just a moment ago, look like they had lost their parents, Lazar felt that his pain was suddenly healed, by 50%. As the only winner tonight, Shower silently stuffed her husbands into her bag. The world was hard. It was best not to provoke these unlucky B***stards who had lost their wives. Luke had no idea how unlucky those nerds were. He simply rushed to his last target, Master Wayne's cargo plane. More than 20 supervillains had already been stuffed into this plane, some more interesting than the others. Since the laborer had shown his face in front of a whole bunch of people tonight, he may as well make use of this and steal a bit from Master Wayne. He wouldn't need to use this alias again after that. If Master Wayne wanted to investigate, he could. In any case, it would have nothing to do with Luke. Taking out the freeze gun and its accessories, Luke studied them for a moment before he suddenly jumped onto a flat rooftop. He fired at the plane on the opposite rooftop. The plane's engine was hit, and the plane couldn't remain stable anymore. Luke threw the gun back into his inventory and landed heavily near the open back door of the plane. He turned around and darted into the plane. More than 20 supervillains had been turned into wooden statues by the restraining device which Master Wayne had developed. Apart from being able to move their eyes, they were helpless. They perked up at this sudden activity. They had suffered too much tonight. Most of them didn't even have half an hour to feel good before they were beaten up by Batman and dragged into the plane. It was as if Master Wayne was a janitor, and the fighter plane was for cleaning up the mess, while the villains were trash that wasn't worth mentioning. What made them even angrier was that Batman was inhumanly strong tonight. He could really take them down with one punch. Now that something unexpected had happened, they might be able to escape. Who the hell wanted to go back to Arkham? It wasn't fun at all. Luke darted inside and instantly locked onto the targets he was interested in. He stabbed them in the necks with 6-stick version 9.0. Of course, he wouldn't use 6-sticks diarrhea mode here, but the simplest, instant dizziness mode. Then, he bundled the targets into the hibernation bags which Mindy jokingly called body bags, before he carried them out. Victor, who was in the pilot's seat, was about to come over, when his head suddenly buzzed. The readings showed that he had been attacked by some sort of subsonic weapon, and he lost control of most of his body. He could only watch Luke leave with 3 big black bags. Flash, he struggled and called for backup. A tiny electric streak flew over from a distance and instantly reached the back of the plane, coming face to face with Luke. Barry was too busy tonight to say anything witty. He simply pushed at Luke's left arm, which was wrapped around the bags. But just as he was about to touch Luke's left arm, he suddenly felt his feet go numb and his body freeze. Barry looked at his feet in surprise, only to see that the 6-stick which the other person had been holding in his right hand was touching the ground, and there were electric sparks. After putting him through a lot of tests, Luke was very familiar with Barry's speed. He could even estimate the increase in his speed under normal circumstances. Barry definitely wasn't as fast as electricity right now. When he ran into a certain someone who knew his habits like the back of his hand, he naturally collapsed. He could only watch Luke jump off the roof and disappear. 5 seconds later, Barry finally recovered. He dashed to the edge of the roof, but couldn't see Luke's laborer alias. Behind him, Victor had basically returned to normal. He warned Barry not to run around. Master Wayne also learned of the situation. Hearing that only 3 people had been taken away, he arranged for the 2 people to return to the base first and throw the trophies from the plane into a more secure, holding cell, before they returned. It was impossible to go after that person. Compared with the 3 people who had been rescued, the remaining villains in the city were more important, even if the Joker had been among the 3. If Master Wayne could defeat the Joker this time, he could do it again next time. This wasn't arrogance, but the confidence which Batman had to have. Without this iron confidence, he would have died long ago. A few minutes later, the Dark Knight's fighter plane finally arrived and joined the cleanup operation. At that moment, the remaining villains had already started to run or go crazy. But with the addition of Luke, half of the Justice League was now working together to clean up the place. No supervillain could last a minute. Those who were weaker couldn't even last a second before they were taken down. In the end, Master Wayne stood on a signal tower on top of a building in the city center, panting slightly as he looked down at the crowd that was gradually retreating. After a long while, he said, "You came at the right time." Luke, who was standing on the other side of the tower, was very calm. "Sorry, I didn't expect something like this to happen here." Master Wayne's lips twitched. "Are you accusing me of not looking after those villains?" He was silent for a long while before he continued, "Do you know the laborer, or the stick man?" Luke resolutely denied it. "I didn't know this person existed until tonight. Because he's an alias I just made up tonight, so that's the truth," he added inwardly. Master Wayne fell silent again. After a long while, he snorted. "Be careful, I'll be keeping an eye on you." With that, his cape unfurled and he glided away. Crossing his arms, Luke stood alone on the tower. His cape fluttered in the night, and he looked like many thoughts were running through his head. After a long while, he chuckled. "How petty. You're still unhappy after catching so many. All I did was steal your Joker. You even specially came to give me a warning." It wasn't like the Joker would have left a message for Master Wayne, since Luke hadn't even given him the chance. In fact, Master Wayne had already taken a step back. He had left because he had given up on demanding an explanation tonight. Master Wayne wouldn't be able to press Luke anymore after tonight, even the other people in the League wouldn't support him. Both Master Wayne and Luke were well aware of this. In the end, he said that he would be keeping an eye on Luke, which probably meant, "It's just this once. Don't try to fool me again." What could Luke say? Naturally, he accepted happily. His bottom line was that he wouldn't fight Master Wayne head-on. Now that the other party had let things go so easily, it couldn't be any better. 2232 Side Story. End of a fantasy journey. In the blink of an eye, winter passed and spring arrived. Florida was warm and comfortable in the spring afternoon. On a quiet private beach, Diana was wearing a bright red bikini and reclining on a white beach chair as she enjoyed an iced grape juice. Her wheat-colored skin, red lips, purple grape juice, and water dripping down her chest made for a truly beautiful picture. Diana was very pleased with Luke's admiring gaze. Women never rejected a man's praise, even if it was only in their gaze, provided that the man didn't discuss them. She coughed lightly and said, "What's been going on with you and Bruce recently? He seems a little unhappy about losing some playmates. I won't provoke him in Gotham." Luke's fingers slid over the cup, creating even bigger water droplets that dripped down to hit the sand. Forget the Mad Hatter and Poison Ivy. The Joker was Master Wayne's obsession. It was normal for him to be a little unhappy after Luke stole him. Diana put down her cup. "It's been more than a month. Including your tour of Europe, you haven't been in Gotham for almost 3 months. Aren't you going back?" Luke wasn't her or Arthur. He had been in Gotham since the beginning, which could be considered his nest. Now that he was wandering around outside, Diana suspected that there were cracks between the two powerful bigshots in the Justice League. Luke shook his head with a smile. "I'm different from Bruce. Gotham is his hometown and his connection, but that's just my starting point, not my end." Diana stared at him. "Where's your destination?" Luke said, "So, I set a small goal first, like changing America." Diana's beautiful mouth dropped open. She was stunned for a few seconds before she confirmed, "You're not kidding." If Gotham was America's most stubborn cancer, then the other major cities in the country were similar lesions. Changing America was as inconceivable as treating someone with terminal cancer. It was even harder than Master Wayne using justice to change Gotham. Diana had seen too many filthy things in the last century. She really didn't think that anyone could turn America into, no, the country had always been a super rotten quagmire. Those who wanted to do their best for the country but couldn't pull it up would instead sink to the repulsive bottom to be absorbed and to decompose. Given Luke's performance, if he said that he wanted to transform a small country with hundreds of thousands of people, Diana wouldn't feel that he was talking big. But transforming hundreds of millions of people into a world-class power, that was much more difficult. Luke took a sip of his mango juice and smacked his lips. "Because I'm Bruce, but I'm not Bruce either." Diana glanced at him curiously. "Huh." Luke couldn't help but admire the rare sight of a slightly childish expression on the 100-year-old princess's face. It wasn't until her sidelong glance turned into a roll of her eyes and a snort that he revealed a little secret. "Do you remember our earliest meeting?" Diana said. "I do." Luke said, "So, you must remember my name, right?" Diana said, "Of course." Her answer was short, but her expression and tone implied, "Get to the point." Luke said, "You might have guessed that I'm indeed Bruce Wayne." Diana waited for a few seconds, but didn't hear anything else. She was surprised. "That's it." Luke was stunned. "That's not enough." Diana frowned. "So you're not Bruce Wayne's half-brother or distant relative?" Luke was lost for words. Fine. The princess had a very traditional mindset. This museum curator clearly couldn't be bothered to understand things like space-time travel and parallel universes. Thinking about it, activities like farming, fishing, and even wine manufacturing on Paradise Island all used very traditional methods. The princess had personally stepped on the grapes to make a batch of wine for Luke, which he had specially put away as a souvenir. As these ridiculous thoughts flashed through his mind, he finally gave the real answer. "I'm Bruce Wayne from another time and space, another Batman. It was a Batman in the Marvel Universe, it was just that there was no Wayne Enterprises there." Diana's beautiful mouth dropped open again. Contrary to Luke's expectations, the princess had indeed considered this possibility, but purely as a fanciful thought. Just like how a man wanted to be rich and have many wives, she hadn't given the thought serious consideration at all. Who would have thought that it was real? That was right. Diana didn't suspect that Luke was lying, because there was no need. With his strength and influence, was there any benefit in him pretending to be Master Wayne from another world? No, she wouldn't change her attitude toward him just because he was or wasn't from another world. This was just an unexpected mystery. After being dazed for a long while, she finally came back to herself. Looking at Luke, who was leisurely enjoying his juice, she couldn't help but ask curiously, "Then, where are you from?" Luke tilted his head and thought for a moment. "It's a little similar to this place. There are superheroes and all kinds of powerful existences." Diana asked, "Then why are you here?" Luke sighed, "For justice." Diana, she didn't believe such nonsense. Firstly, given Luke's personality, he would have a clear goal. He wouldn't mess around with random things. Secondly, wasn't it enough to be a hero in one dimension? Luke decisively said that it really wasn't enough. "There is still a lot of criminal activity on my side. There are also a lot of forces and mysterious existences in space that can easily destroy a city or a planet." He spread his hands helplessly. "But I think it'll take more than 10 years or decades for me to encounter strong enough enemies on Earth. The slightly weaker Justice League over there will take care of itself. I was a little free, so I came here." Frowning and thinking for a moment, Diana shook her head. "You took care of Doomsday and Steppenwolf quickly. We won't see many here who are stronger than that." Luke chuckled and wagged a finger. No. I don't have many supervillains with outstanding strength on my side anymore. They don't appear as fast as they are wiped out, so I'm really bored." Diana thought for a moment. "What do you mean, wiped out?" Luke nodded calmly. "Just like what you're thinking. Physical elimination. Dead enemies don't have the chance to jump out and cause trouble twice." At least, that's what most supervillains are like. Was a Batman who killed people still Master Wayne? Diana was skeptical. "Are you sure you're really Bruce Wayne? Names are just code names, and I'm a man in a mask." Luke shrugged. "Bruce also warned me that he would be keeping an eye on me. I'm willing to let him supervise me." Diana was silent, but her eyes flickered. Luke suddenly reached out and took her hand. "But I don't like an old man watching me. So, Your Highness, are you willing to sacrifice some of your time for this world to supervise me?" Diana stared at him in surprise, but didn't pull her hand back. A gentle sea breeze blew over the sea in spring, indicating that a brand new era had arrived. 2233 Side story. Luke's graduation project. The weather in Texas was as hot as ever, but the underground base was extremely cool. Luke cautiously completed the final assembly before he sighed in relief. "It's finally done." The base doors opened with a ding, and Selena walked in with her hands in her pockets. Following the AI program's directions, she went through several hallways and came up behind Luke. Pressing against his back, she craned her neck to look at the finished product on the table. "Is this that lousy system you created?" Luke sighed helplessly and reached back to smack her butt. "The system is the system. Can you not add the word lousy. Selena didn't care if the system was lousy or not. Luke had already described its functions to her. What face-slapping system, King of Fighters system, magnate system, entertainment system, they were all just different covers for the core. Except for the huge difference in the resources consumed, the system was essentially like the toys which Luke had given her. She could also come up with one herself now, provided that she didn't need to consider its practicality and efficiency, and got Luke to provide core support in passing. But that was too boring. Wasn't it good for Luke to spend that time on her instead? She grabbed Luke's disobedient hands and put them out from under her shirt before she got down to business. Your girlfriends have been a little free recently. They've been playing at my place for 3 days. Can you go over and get rid of them? Luke waved his hand, and the system object on the workbench was stored in his inventory. Then, he picked Director Selena up on his back and went to a lounge not far away and jumped into the indoor swimming pool. Selena pressed on the side of her neck so that her clothes, which were made from nanomaterial, pulled back. Her tanned body floated in the light blue water. Luke rolled over and let her lie comfortably on him as he swam unhurriedly in the water. Are you sure you want to go and get rid of them? Director Selena moved lazily and slid down to rest her head on his chest. Fine, you can swim with me for 2 hours. Luke dutifully obeyed. In any case, he could swim for 2 hours without expending any extra effort. The truth was that Director Selena, who had extraordinary stamina, couldn't be that obedient. In just 2 hours, she occupied higher territory many times and picked up the pace. In the end, Luke led her lazily back to the side of the pool. Pressing herself to his chest, she finally got down to business. Your girlfriends are still too naive. They probably won't waste too much of your time. Of course, you'll definitely waste some time on them, so has your chairman thought of a way to get rid of them? I heard from Angel that she's preparing for a month's annual leave. You'll be busy. Luke's fingers slowly slid down her back. It was extremely smooth and powerful. Why don't you go somewhere else to play? Selena enjoyed the massage after her exercise, and felt like sleeping. Where? Luke said, find a suitable time and space, and toss it into the official version of my system. Slow and gentle. Selena gave him massage instructions, then yawned. That's fine. I can also take Cindy on an intergalactic trip. Her voice grew softer and softer. Just as she was about to fall asleep, she suddenly murmured, what's the name of your system? Luke was silent for a moment. He hadn't really thought about it. After all, it had only just been completed, and he had only ever used simple codenames for the beta versions, like 1.0 and 2.0. Thinking for a moment, he decided, let's call it the Salvation System. After all, if the person who gets it can't save the world, they won't even be able to leave the novice village. Selena hummed vaguely and pressed herself even closer to Luke before she gradually fell asleep. Luke wrapped one hand around her body so that she could fall asleep peacefully, then took out the round ball that was the Salvation System from his inventory. The ball was less than 5 centimeters in diameter, and was covered in a hazy, translucent white light. There were faint buildings and objects inside. If the ball expanded countless times, it would become a high-tech base. This was the best Luke could do at the moment. No matter what, he couldn't compare with the maker of the super detective system, who could compress it to the size of a speck of dust. It wasn't that Luke wasn't strong enough, but that he had his own specialties. The creator of the super detective system was extremely proficient in spatial abilities, which was why they could compress the system medium to such an extreme degree. Luke's current mental strength was good enough, but he didn't have a suitable spell for it. Magic in the Marvel Universe was essentially borrowed or stolen from mysterious existences. It was true that Luke could find a few weaklings and negotiate with them to borrow power, but that would be equivalent to letting the other party's most essential power enter the system. After he threw out the system, who knew if the other party would tamper with it? After all, Luke himself wasn't sure if he could control the system remotely after he threw it out. But judging from the super detective system's performance, it should be very hard to tamper with it. That was because it had to borrow a shell. In order to function, it had used Luke, this Marvel stowaway, as cover, in order to avoid being discovered by powerful existences. To use a business analogy, the system's maker secretly held the majority of the original shares, while other people only saw Luke as the local who ran operations. Only if the IRS paid attention to Luke and investigated him might they discover that he and the system's maker were sharing the profits. What was even crazier was that the super detective system was equivalent to an offshore company set up by some manufacturer in the Cayman Islands. There was no way to track down the manufacturer. After Luke graduated at level 50, he didn't immediately break away from the system. Instead, he spent hundreds of years figuring out how it worked. He would be worried if he didn't. In fact, he had just peeled open the system, when it self-destructed the next day, leaving nothing behind at all. Thankfully, Luke had long mastered the system's module functions and made them his own. The items and prisoners in the inventory were also transferred to a space prison which he had personally built. The functions of this self-constructed space weren't as exaggerated as the system's inventory space, but it was enough for storing things and locking people up. He gained more from going to all this trouble than he had ever imagined. He discovered the motive of the system's maker. Again, to use a business analogy, the maker as the owner of the original shares would get a fixed amount of profit from the power of faith which Luke collected. 10 to 20% of the maker's share was used to maintain the system's storage and learning modules. The rest were the maker's gross profit. When the power of faith was collected and purified to an astonishing degree, the outcome was something like the divine power crystals mentioned in online novels. Purification removed most of the useless impurities, and packaging consumed a lot of divine power. Therefore, the maker's net profit, in the end, was only a small portion. The power crystals were then placed in a secret box in an unknown dimension. Only the maker, who knew the key, could open the box and take out the divine crystals. The gross profits were split 70 to 30 or 80 to 20 between the maker and Luke. Taking out the consumption expenses for purification and packaging, the pure profits might only be 50 to 50. It had to be pointed out that money laundering in the ordinary world started at 70 to 30, it wasn't rare for it to even be 90 to 10. Luke's system could be considered time laundering. You could get rich from laundering money, while Luke could become a god from laundering time. Besides, the system was cheap. It took a lot of time to finalize the system's design in the initial stages. It also needed some divine power to maintain its own operations before it found a host. However, as long as divine power was sent over once, the maker could still make a huge profit. In any case, the materials which the system needed to consume weren't worth mentioning to existences at the level of the maker. Luke recalled the detective system. This thing didn't even have a D*MN shop system. He was 100% sure that this system had simply been built according to the most basic template. What an amazing maker! They didn't provide any sort of material items, and just transferred divine power. Divine power wasn't measured by how lethal it was, but by how many mystical things it could accomplish. For example, he could only use the Kunlun Kai refining technique in Life 1 before to buff his family. Now, he just needed to inject them with divine power to make them stronger. As long as he controlled the strength of each injection, there would be no danger. He no longer needed the system as an intermediary. Moreover, the divine power that originated from human spirit and faith should be the hard currency used in many universes. Otherwise, the maker of the detective system wouldn't have specially crossed time and space to collect it. Therefore, Luke attached great importance to the creation of a new source of divine power. He played with the salvation system in his hand and looked at Director Selena. Before he released his first official system, Luke kissed her. Director Selenai, bless this system with your fool's luck. He had obtained a system that enabled him to protect his family, protect the world, and create a perfect ending. Therefore, it was time to give the people of other desperate worlds hope to save their world. He just didn't know which lucky person would get this salvation system to protect their family, save the world, and reach the peak of their lives. He was really looking forward to it. Safety first. He had to add some supplementary algorithms. It would be a joke if the system and its host were annihilated by a powerful existence after Luke threw the system out. With this thought in mind, he couldn't help but add some more key algorithms. A new legend was about to begin. All videos have ads disabled. YouTube doesn't pay me enough to cover electricity costs. If you are well off, please consider donating via PayPal or becoming a member of this YouTube channel. Thank you.